YouTube is live.
Okay, TB 30, are we live?
Here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, cue.
Good evening and welcome to this, the April 27th virtual meeting of the Livermore City Council. We are streaming to you live from City Hall and all places sheltered in place. Thank you for joining us tonight. Let me ask I now call the meeting to order and ask that the city clerk do the roll call, please.
Councilmember Carling?
Here.
Councilmember Coomer?
Here.
Councilmember Munro?
Here.
Councilmember Vice Mayor Warner? Vice Mayor Warner?
I'm here.
Mayor Marchand?
I'm here. Very good. So all present and accounted for. Let me ask, we will now conduct the Pledge of Allegiance. Because of feedback and delay, I will be reciting the pledge tonight. So please mute your microphones and follow along if you would at home. Thank you. One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice. Thank you. Those participating in tonight's meeting, this meeting is being conducted pursuant to provisions of the Brown Act and recent executive orders issued by the governor to facilitate teleconferencing to reduce the risk of COVID-19 transmission at public meetings. The city of Livermore has met all of the applicable noticing requirements, and the public is welcome to participate in this meeting. I'm going to take a few moments to explain the process we'll be using at this meeting. In addition to broadcasting over TB 30, we are using the Zoom meeting platform and YouTube. This allows members of the public to participate by submitting public comments through YouTube or the Zoom Q&A features. The Zoom and YouTube meetings links are available on the City of Livermore website and on the agenda. When participating in tonight's meeting, one comment may be submitted per person, per item. Comments may be no more than 500 words. If you submit multiple comments, item, the last comment will be read into the record and the remaining comments will be added to the meeting record. The public comment period closes at the conclusion of the comments being read into the record. Please note, comments should be submitted when the item is announced and include the number of the item at the beginning of each post. So with that, we'll go on the agenda here. Okay, moving on to the Citizens Forum. Do we have any public comment submitted so far for the Citizens Forum? This City Clerk.
Do we have public comment from email or Zoom?
No.
Do we have any public comment received for Citizens Forum for YouTube?
No.
Okay then, well, I will close the Citizens Forum and moving on to the consent calendar. One of the things that I will say, well, you know what, hold on a minute. I was anticipating some public comment tonight, but seeing none, I would like to direct the audience tonight and people listening. If you have not yet read Councilmember Munro's letter to the community that came out on Friday, I would ask that you please do. It is truly a remarkable letter, and it underscores the commitment and the dedication of the staff here at the City of Livermore that are committed to maintain the services that we as the residents of the city enjoy. I will tell you the commitment has been, it's humbling for me. It's remarkable. I have emailed staff members. Last night, I emailed several staff members after 10:30 on a Sunday night, and they responded. So this is a level of commitment that you are seeing from the men and women that that run this city. And it is truly remarkable. So read Councilmember Munro's letter and recognize that that goes for all of us here on the city council, that we all are greatly appreciative of the tremendous effort and the commitment that all of you, all the people that work for the city of Livermore, our public safety officers, the police, the fire, public works, every one of you that's in the trenches, everybody from City Hall, we in the council greatly appreciate what all of you are doing to keep this city running at this really unprecedented time in our history. So from the council to all of you, thank you very much for everything that you are doing. With that, moving on to the consent calendar, we have gotten a lot of comments, and because of that, I would like to pull item 4.03. We have had comments about bringing this back. There was originally, when we passed the first reading of the ordinance, there was thought that this was going to be developed over a period of time. That was on March 9th. We are looking at a completely different world today. Now we are in shelter in place. And since non-essential businesses like tobacco shops are closed per the state order, we will be, I'll be pulling this and asking the staff to continue to work on this. We had talked about adding to this later with CBD components to it, also the number of tobacconists that would be exempt from the ordinance. So I'm going to be pulling this to have staff continue to work on this, probably to come back. Well, let me ask if I could ask the city attorney, what's your best guesstimate to come back if this is going to be reworked with additional comments from the council?
Mr. Mayor, this is Jason Alcala, your city attorney. You are correct that the council gave us additional direction back on March 9th to consider a second step for this particular ordinance. If we were to pull the item from tonight and come back with one comprehensive ordinance for the exemption for the sale of premium flavored tobacco, I anticipate we could return probably in June. I would say by June.
Okay, well, since Mayor Breed from San Francisco announced that they were going to be extending the shelter-in-place order with modifications until the end of May, June looks like a pretty good time frame. I know that we have some comments or some people that wished to comment on 4.03, but that was before I was going to pull it. So would the recommendation be to have those read or simply forwarded on to staff to interpret?
Mr. Mayor, this is your city attorney once again. I would invite those speakers to provide their comments if they so choose. Otherwise, if they want to decline based upon your action, I think we can proceed. But I would give them the opportunity to comment. Okay,
I think many of them have submitted their comments by email or by YouTube or by Zoom. So I'm not sure how we would poll them to see if in fact they wanted their comments read into the record. Let me forward that on to the city clerk, Ms. Weber.
We did receive many in advance of the meeting over email. Mr. Alcala, would you recommend that we read those?
If the only comments we have currently are the ones that came through via email, I think we can package those up and carry those forward to when the item returns in June. There's no need to read them today.
This
Okay.
is, can I make a comment?
Certainly. Vice Mayor Warner?
What I would suggest is that these will be part of the record for this meeting. They could be read in the other meeting as well, but you might as well get them out there now in the record, right? I don't want you to read them, but I'm saying that they should be available as part of the written record. Is that possible?
Correct, and many of them were included in the supplemental today, so they are already attached to the agenda.
Okay.
Correct.
So all of the comments will be considered as part of the written record of this meeting.
Correct.
Okay. So if it is with the support of the council, I will pull this item tonight, and then based on the comments that we have received tonight as part of the record, is there any additional comment that any member of the council would like to make before we send this back to staff? I made a couple of comments regarding the number of exemptions, the number of licenses, permits, and the CBD elements to the ordinance that we're going to be put into a second step, but we're going to instead craft one ordinance to move all at once. Any other comments from any of the other council members?
This is Bob. I've got my hand raised there as well. You can maybe see. But I fully support pulling this. We have plenty of time, and might as well take it and craft the ordinance as best we can. So thank you for pulling it.
Okay. Any other
Me
council
as
member?
well. Yeah, Coomber, I'm on board with your suggestions, and I think we pull it.
Okay. Councilmember Carling?
Yes, thanks. I agree with pulling it. I think we probably all read most, if not all, the emails that we got today. So I think packaging it with the minutes from this meeting is just fine. The only question I have is, how do we decide, just as an example, how do we decide the number of tags for premium tobaccos? How is that decision reached?
Mr. City Attorney?
Councilmember Carling, this is Jason, your city attorney. We would have staff evaluate the market right now and try to determine how many tobacco retailers are actually engaged in the sale of flavored premium tobacco products. And I think that'll be the first cut to see how many we have. If it is a very low number, I think that you could use that as your baseline. If it is a rather large number, I think they'll have to do additional research to determine what would be the appropriate number. They will return in June with recommendations for you. They will have a set number, but you have a range. You'll have discretion in your action to adopt the ordinance to decide how many you actually want. But we will have a recommendation for you.
So when you bring it back in June, we could alter or provide our own comments regarding your recommendation?
That is correct.
Okay, thanks.
Councilmember Monroe?
I am wondering whether we could do some kind of conversation here tonight. I know that in the intervening time, so I wasn't there in March, which is irrespective. I mean, it doesn't actually matter with regard to what I'm about to say. It's been 6 months or so. No, I take it back. It's been 4 months since we've had the police enforcing this policy. I'd like to have some information about how it's going. The world is a very different world right now. I'm not sure that my agreement with any kind of exemption would still hold. I'm not sure it wouldn't. I don't know. Is it possible to have that discussion now? Or is he really the only option to push it forward to June?
Mr. City Attorney?
So if Council Member Monroe, if your request is how is it going in the field from the officer, the police department does have an officer who has been inspecting the various retailers in town, determining what is and is not compliant with the existing ordinance. Unfortunately, I don't believe that officer is with us today. However, if that is important information, we can definitely bring that back in June so we can put this in context of the ordinance overall.
Mm-hmm. Would but our options at the moment are either to vote on it or put it forward, I take it?
That is correct.
Okay. Right. Well, in that case, put it forward.
Okay. Vice Mayor Warner, you had your hand raised.
Yes, I wanted to make sure I understood what the city attorney just said with respect to Councilmember Carling's question. The implication I got out of that is that the number that would be allowed would certainly not be larger than the one today, in case anybody is rushing out there to somehow set it up. Is that what I heard?
That is one potential avenue. Again, you have discretion as the city council when adopting this exemption, whether to implement it at all. So you have the ability to set it at 0. You have the ability to set it at 1. You have the ability to set it at 2. What I was proposing is having the actual team from the police department that's inspecting the operations out in the field come back with a recommendation based upon the current market as it stands. And so they can give you that information. If people were to rush out and do this, I would not advise that because you may not actually adopt this exemption. So again, right now, the current status quo is the sale of flavored tobacco products in Livermore is prohibited.
That's where we are now. Okay, very good. I don't see any more hands raised. Any further comment? Okay, so 4.03 is pulled. We still have the rest of the consent calendar, 401, 402, 404 through 409. I'll entertain a motion for the rest of the consent calendar.
I'll
So
move
moved.
approval. Coomber.
Okay, moved by Councilmember Coomber. Is there
I'll
a second?
second.
Seconded by Councilmember Munro. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Oh, and I'm sorry, we've got to go by roll call, please. Madam City Clerk.
Councilmember Carling,
Aye.
Councilmember Coomer,
Aye.
Councilmember Monroe,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Warner,
Aye.
Mayor Marchand.
Aye. Thank you very much. Okay, so the consent calendar passes. Moving on to 5.01. This is a hearing to consider adjustments to the sewer service and use charges for the Sewer Enterprise Fund and the first reading of an ordinance adjusting residential, commercial, and institutional sewer service and use charges. I'll ask for the staff to give the staff report, and then I'll open the public hearing to receive public testimony.
Honorable Mayor, this is your city manager, Mark Roberts, and I'd like to at this time introduce Anthony Smith, who will be introducing the item and bringing the overall item and introducing our consultant who also worked on this item. So Anthony.
Thank you, Mark. Good evening, Mayor and Council members. My name is Anthony Smith. I'm an analyst in the Public Works Department. Tonight, I'm here to introduce our consultant who will review the process and findings of the wastewater rate study. The rate study recommends increases to the sewer service charges in order to sustainably fund the operation, maintenance, and replacement of the wastewater collection, treatment, and disposal system. In light of the financial hardships caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, staff are recommending that the city delay implementation of these increased rates until January 2021. Our consultant, Habib Isaac of IB Consulting, will now present on the rate study. Habib, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Thank you so much, Anthony. Let me open up this PowerPoint I have on the screen so everyone can see it. And in case there's a delay, you should be able to see a screen with the PowerPoint to get a Livermore sewer rate study. If I get a nod from someone.
Yes.
And with that, thank you so much. We've been working with the city since last fall to do a full cost of service update to the sewer rates and look at the overall financial outlook of the Sewer Enterprise Fund. You have a report for your administrative record on the proposed rates and the backup documentation for those calculations. And this is going to give you a high-level summary of our analysis. Some of the main objectives was to first note that the city was at the end of its adopted rates. That's on schedule, and Prop 218 requires you, whenever you update rates, you have to go through this process. And with that, we want to update the financial plan, so not just look at the short-term, but long-term horizon to make sure you fund all your needs as well as your capital improvements. We look through your updated flows of your customer base, residential and non-residential. And then one thing that's very important that we really focus on is making sure that your rates are equitable and could pass the test of Prop 218 to make sure it's cost of service based. And we follow with the full comprehensive report. So we're looking at financial planning. There's more to it than just your daily operational costs. We do look at your projected operations and how that could increase over time. We update your flow demand to look at projections of how your customers are using water that then turns into wastewater flows. One big component outside of just your daily operations is your capital spending. Utilities are, all utilities, water, wastewater, are heavy on capital spending and making sure those investments in your system occur to make sure you have a healthy system, which actually generates a very strong financial health. We also look at your reserves and your reserve policies. Besides the operating capital, you also need to make sure you have healthy reserves to ensure that you could meet your daily operations as well as your capital for the entire year. And then we look at how revenues are coming in and if there's any changes to those revenues in the foreseeable future. So when we look at your current financial position, we first looked at a few metrics. The first one is you're looking at your operations to make sure you have positive net income. This graph shows your operating position. The black line is your current rates, revenue, and the red trend line is your expenses. And these gray bars is basically your net income after operations. This does not account for your capital spending. So you want to make sure you have more than above your operating to fund your capital. We want to make sure you meet your debt covenants, fund the capital expenses coming online, and then maintain your reserve targets. With this part of the capital, this is your outlook for the next 5 years. And you have a pretty extensive capital projects moving forward. Next year, you have 11 million, followed by another 11 million, 10 million. And as I mentioned, this is one of the main things that you have to address to make sure that you keep your system healthy. And last time you started ramping up your replacements to make sure you maintain your asset management, and you're continuing to do that, and then it's going to ramp down a little bit. So this is a good way to ensure that you don't have significant fluctuations in your cost. And then as with your current rates, as you make those investments, this is your reserve balance, and you see that your ending balances will go down without any adjustment. One thing to note, this is, you have 40 million in the coffers, but you built that up over time expecting to spend that money and schedule those big capital projects that I just showed you. So this is typical. It's coming down, but then you want to make sure you don't go all the way down. You want to come back up because capital goes up and down over the years, and you need to have funds available for those bigger projects that come online periodically. So when we look at this, what we see is we basically need to continue making some very modest adjustments to continue that system reinvestment. Your replacement expenses is a critical component of your long-term financial health. And additional revenues are needed to continue that program. So when we look at the proposed financial plan, we then look at, we want to continue to maintain positive net income. We also want to make sure that we provide level adjustments over the years so there's not one year that has a huge rate spike. And then we want to have enough funding above your operating to fund this capital amount. So we want to make sure that all this is funded, and we're doing it through PAYGO, which means we're doing it with funds on hand. There's no borrowing occurring, which then provides a huge benefit to your customers by not paying additional costs related to interest incurred to issue debt. And then you want to make sure that you continue to maintain those reserve targets. When we look at what is your overall revenue needs for fiscal year 2021, we have your specific costs related to some debt and well as your single family fixed lateral program. That's identified separately, so we only charge single family homes for that. We have your operating costs. We have some offsets, revenue offsets that are able to offset that total expense. And then we have your net income, which goes to your capital. So this is basically capital funding. And the total amount that you need to recover for 2021 is 24.2 million from your sewer rates. One thing we have to do with Prop 218 is we need to allocate those costs how it's incurred to make sure we are allocating appropriately and charging customers their fair share. We broke it out into different components. We have an account charge. So when you think about account charge, every account pays the same amount irrespective of what type of land use or how much wastewater they have. What is really focused here is just to have an account, you need to have a base rate. Then we have flow based on how much flow you're actually treating. This BOD and TSS are the treatment costs that you have to focus on to mitigate. And then you have that program that I mentioned of the $283,000 that is just charged to single family homes. So we have to segregate that separately. When we go through each component, the customer account component is charged to everyone evenly across the board. So as I mentioned, it doesn't matter what type of use you are. Everyone has to pay the same base fee of $26 a month. We then look at the variable components, which is the treatment of BOD, TSS, and flow. The single family, multifamily, once we allocate that cost, we turn it into a monthly flat fee because their flow is very consistent over the entire year. It doesn't change much. And then for non-residential customers, we do it on actual water use because the flows between different types of commercial could vary quite a bit, even from restaurant to restaurant. So therefore, they just pay based on their actual water use. So then within those categories, they're paying their fair share based on total volume. So these are the new rates for fiscal year 2021. And we did a projection out for the 5 years. And in Prop 218, you can only go out 5 years. You can't go out any further than that. And what that means is the notice is your maximum. It's your absolute ceiling. You cannot go over it unless you go through this process again. That's required through Prop 218. But it doesn't mean that these are automatic. It doesn't mean that now it's on autopilot and you're going to go up to this. It means that through your annual budgetary process, you can see how you're doing and whether or not you need to go up to the max. The one thing you can't do is you can't go over what was noticed. So that's the key. And with that, that ends my presentation. I am open and available to answer questions, and I'm going to turn it back over to Anthony to wrap up this PowerPoint.
Thank you, Habib. I appreciate it. So tonight, staff is recommending that the council take the following actions. 1, hold a public hearing to take comments on the proposed 5-year adjustment to the sewer service charges. 2, determine that a majority protest does not exist at the conclusion of the public hearing. And 3, introduce by first reading an ordinance amending the sewer service charges effective July 1st, 2020, with a delay in the effective date of the sewer service charges for fiscal year 2021 by 6 months until January 1st, 2021. Under this final recommendation, commercial and monthly billed residential customers will not see an increase until they receive their monthly bill for January 2021. The majority of residential customers are billed via the county's annual property tax bills. For these customers, payment for wastewater service remains due with payment of the county property tax bill. But the amount for wastewater service included on that property tax bill will reflect no rate increase until January 1st, 2021. That concludes our presentation. Staff and the consultant are both available for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. So are there any questions for staff at this time? I'm looking for, let's see, let's get the back here to gallery view. All right, and so let me just, there we go. Oh. Back to gallery view. Oh, there we are. Forgive me here. Okay, does anybody, any questions from the council at this point?
I wanted to clarification. I've seen some discussion around what a majority protest is, and I just wanted to make sure that that was into the record, what it would take to have a majority protest.
Thank you. I believe that would be, is that for the city clerk or is that the city manager? City manager.
City manager. So again, Mark Roberts, your city manager. A majority protest is a written protest received by the end of your public hearing from a majority of the account holders. Mr. Smith can clarify exactly what the number, but I believe the number is approximately 16,200, something like that. Is that correct? And perhaps the city clerk has that number at the top of her list.
This is Anthony Smith. The number required for a majority protest is 16,002.
Very good.
Okay, any other questions? I don't see any other hands raised. Let me just scroll over here to the next page. Okay, I don't see any hands raised. I got a couple questions. First up, in reading we got a number of emails and a number of letters. A common theme was that why can't we use the general fund for the to fund the sewers? And as I understand, it's because the sewer is the wastewater treatment is an enterprise fund, and as such, as an enterprise, it collects the money that it takes to operate it from the actual users of that system, and that's actually more equitable than using the general fund. This is actually paid for by the users. Mr. City Manager?
That is correct. The enterprise fund is designed to have those who use the system pay for the system. If you subsidize that from the general fund, you'd end up having taxpayers who aren't using the system or aren't using it to the same level, subsidizing those users who are actually using the system. So the concept of an enterprise fund is that those who actually get benefit from the system pay for that system, and that we don't create a subsidy from the taxpayers at large to individual users.
So this is actually the definition of small government. Those who benefit pay, and it doesn't have any subsidies to that are moved from one area of the organization into subsidizing the activities of another. So all the money that's raised by the enterprise stays within the enterprise.
That's correct.
Okay, very good. Let's see, another, let's see, the planning.
John, while you're looking for that,
Yeah.
how many negative protests did we get? I know Mr. Smith said we needed the majority would be 16,002. How many did we actually get?
Marie, do you want to sort of note how the process will actually work?
Yes. After the mayor holds the public hearing, he will instruct me to finish tabulating the protests, and then I will have a final number for you.
Okay,
Thanks.
We won't tip our hand yet. So I heard Mr. Isaac say that he mentioned pay as you go. That is the cheapest way. It saves the ratepayers the most. Is not going to debt financing and pay as you go. That does save the ratepayers the most money. Mr. Isaac?
Hi, this is Anthony. I'll go ahead and chime in real quick. That is correct. Our projections on debt financing capital improvement projects look to be, by the time the money is paid back, could be near double the cost of the original investment.
Okay, so by increasing it now or next year, that's actually the cheapest way to go because it saves the ratepayers the most money. And it is extending this over a long planning horizon to ensure that we can replace those capital assets. And it was rather stunning, but the total value of the capital assets, as I recall from the staff report, was $1.5 billion. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, $1.5 billion, and our general fund is somewhere in the vicinity of about 116 million, half of which goes to public safety. So this is why this is an enterprise fund that is separate from the general fund. is because it is so important that it's independently funded by the people that are using it.
Yes, and Mr. Mayor, my apologies, I was on mute, but Anthony is totally correct. It essentially doubles your total project costs when you integrate debt and interest paid.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Isaac. I appreciate that. It was a very good point. When I was with the Zone 7 Water Agency, we were always, it was always impressed upon us that pay-as-you-go was the most economical and saved the most for the ratepayers. Vice Mayor Warner, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'd like to point out that I believe that is the cheapest way to go, but in light of the the pandemic, we have delayed the implementation of the rate increase, and as a result, it is going to cost us a little bit more money. But in this instance, we're saying because of the situation, the delay and the extra cost is worth it, but that we can't do that for a long extended period of time. And the thought is that we should be out of this after the beginning of next year.
Yeah, as you point out, did you ever think that, because as you mentioned, this delay, the 6-month delay, is going to cost or put us about $4.3 million deeper into the hole? Did you ever think that the $4.3 million could be construed as a small amount of money? But you're absolutely right.
Right. So I wanted, I read all the letters that came in as well, and you understand and can, how hard it is for everyone. But there is no way out of this because of the enterprise fund, the need to replace the assets. And we are going to bear a financial penalty for delaying this. It is, but we can't bear a large one. And I think there's the other thing with respect to the general fund that was brought up. Not only do you have the issues with respect to the enterprise fund, and you don't want to commingle, but I think people should also be cognizant that all cities are going to be hit hard by this pandemic as well. And we haven't yet reported the financial impact to us to the general fund.
Well, and as you pointed out, the longer that we delay, the more expensive it's going to be to catch up. And I just saw in yesterday's paper that the Union Sanitary District is recommending a 45% increase because of their planning horizon, that they waited too long to adjust the rates. So they're going to be raising it 45%. And some of the letters misunderstood. This was a 27% increase this year. This is a 27% increase over a number of years. So it's 7% followed by a series of 4 or 5%. So we're spreading this out. It's not 27% this year. It's actually spread out over a number of years to lessen that blow. Let's see. Councilmember Munro, don't forget to unmute yourself. There we go.
Yeah, I remembered. I just wanted to, as I've been thinking about this, there are very few things I can think of that are more important than having a working sewage system, as anybody that has ever plunged a toilet will attest. And so as we're thinking about how we spend our money, investing in the capital costs that are to come, and doing it in a timely fashion, it seems like the prudent thing to do. Recognizing that we are in a very, very difficult financial position, all of us, cities, individuals, just down the line. Yeah.
Right. So any further questions from the council before I open up the public hearing? Seeing no further questions from the council, I'm going to open the public hearing and ask for the public testimony. This is going to be both from YouTube and from Zoom comments and email. So I'll hand this over to the city clerk, Ms. Weber.
Yes, have we received comments prior to the meeting and in Zoom?
And the comments that we received prior to the meeting, those will be entered into the record. Will those be read, or are we reading the ones from the, because all the council members, I know all of us have read the emails that were sent to us previously, and also those were included in the packet for the meeting. But so you'll start reading the ones that we've received from Zoom and YouTube?
We will read public comments that we received via email as well. We let the public know that was one method to submit
Okay.
public comment before noon, but we won't be reading protests, only public comment.
Okay, very good. Okay, so if you please.
Ms. Elam?
Okay, the first public comment via email was from Brent Spencer, and it reads, "We Livermore residents already pay fees as part of our property taxes, and now you are trying to add to our tax burden this economic crisis. This is a terrible time to be doing this to us. Your letter reads as if it will be passed and delayed for 6 months. Nothing should be passed at this time. Wait till next year to address any new fees or taxes. We are all hurting financially. Lay off the fees for now." Brent Spencer. There's another one from Stephen Dunbar, Mayor and City Council. "Regarding sewer service, I think this sentence from the city FAQ says it best. Not approving increases unfairly transfers costs from current users to future users of the system. So yes, you should delay the increase given COVID. You should have an honest conversation about pensions and other long-term debt, both here and in your budget process, and what you can and cannot do with them, and their impact on the budget as a whole, currently 9.1% of the budget. You should see whether those other sewer districts end up having long-term maintenance problems and adjust your estimates accordingly. At the end of the day, though, it isn't fair to the younger generations and the future generations to bear the cost of delayed maintenance. As a rather convenient warning, near my hometown, San Luis Obispo is currently depleting their entire reserve fund in 1 year to fix a broken water supply pipeline. It will happen here too someday. If you deplete the reserves at all this year, plan on catching back up." And then he has a link to the article. Thank you, Stephen Dunbar. The next one is from Lainey Marie. "Please do not ask Livermore residents to pay an increased sewer tax at this time. Please hold off until the fall and we know more about incomes and businesses being able to withstand through this world crisis. Thank you, taxpayer." I also have a comment from Google Docs. This is from John and Ruth Collins. "Please do not approve this motion. We have an emergency in which most have zero income and many have lost jobs. The head of the Center for Disease Control, CDC, has warned that this virus may well cause a second and more severe outbreak this winter, and that is this situation may take a few years to subside. Our economy is in recession, and a number of respected economists fear it may fall into depression. Although we don't know what the future holds, we do know that our economy is not going to return to its previous state this year, and probably not even next year. This is a time to cease previous plans to build parking structures and other buildings and instead use our money for essential functions such as the sewer. We ask council members to use the current situation to make decisions based upon those facts. We voted for you with that expectation. Please show us that we made the right choice so that we may have confidence in you as we go forward. We go to the ballot box this year." We did also receive one comment from Zoom, and that is from Jerry Artingstall, and it says agenda item 5.0. "In the prior 3 years, what sewer maintenance was completed from the last tax increase and how much was spent on the maintenance?" And that's the last question from Zoom.
Have we received comments from YouTube?
Yes. Yes, we have 3 comments. First one from Big Dogs Livermore. "The 2020 beginning fee is 4.6% higher than the existing fee when then compounds over the course of 5 years, yielding much higher proposed 5% increase over the same period. Why, and should it not be based on the prior fee? Why did staff look at 5 years versus 3 years, which has been customary in the past? This seems to lead that a 3-year projection would not constitute an increase. Then Carrie Johnson. Most folks do not even get a 3% raise. How do you justify a 7% a year? Evan B. I second Stephen Dunbar's comments. And that's all from YouTube.
Okay, very good. So that's the, so again, we received a number of comments by email prior to the meeting. All of the council members received those, and they're all part of the record. And we've read a number of, actually I've read all of them. I've got a couple of, so with that, I'm going to close the public hearing and bring it back to the council. Some additional questions that I got from the public comments. Somebody had suggested, why don't we use the money instead of building the parking structure to use that for the sewer maintenance? Let me send that over to the city manager.
So as we discussed before, you have very specific funding sources for the various things that you do. Your downtown parking structure is a combination of general fund dollars and also parking in lieu fees. We noted before that essentially subsidizing from taxpayers who fund your general fund to those who actually use your sewer system is something we try to avoid. We ultimately wish to have those who are using the enterprise service pay for that and pay for it in the amount and proportion that is fair, so that they are paying their fair share of that. As you noted earlier, the city is going to go through its budget update process as we move forward, and the general fund revenues, we are projecting those to be reduced over this year and the coming year at least. Finally, one of the things that you all have to do as council members is balance the competing needs of the community. The general fund is generally set up for public safety first. That is the largest expenditure out of there, but related to improvements in the downtown to ultimately support businesses recovering in that area. Parking was the #1 item that members of the public brought up when we went out to workshops. So ultimately balancing those needs is the council's objective. Your staff recommends that you ultimately fund your enterprise funds using the appropriate funds gathered from the ratepayers rather than a cross subsidy.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I see Councilmember Munro, you have your hand raised.
Actually, I do not at the moment. I may later on, but I just forgot to unraise it.
Oh,
before.
okay, very good. Vice Mayor Warner, your hand is raised.
Yes, listening to some of the comment there, I think I would ask the city manager to explain a little bit more in detail why we have to do this approval now with respect to the tax bill timing, and a little bit more on that, so that explain why we have to take action now in order to raise rates in January.
Honorable Vice Mayor, this is your city manager again. And one of the things that the city did many years ago was move billing to the tax rolls. That was done to reduce overhead costs that were having to be paid by the ratepayers. Essentially doing the billing on the tax roll for those users that have a very constant use of the service saves those ratepayers money. And so in order to actually execute that savings, we do have to comply with the rules that Alameda County sets up for placing items on the tax roll. That means that you, when you raise rates, you have to go through a process like this, a hearing, a protest hearing. You have to make findings, and you have to ultimately do a first reading of an ordinance. Then at a subsequent meeting, you have to do a second reading of that ordinance. and then you have to ultimately have 30 days before your ordinance goes into effect. All of those have to happen before the beginning of the time that we go through and refigure the rates and apportion those to individual properties. And then finally, after that step, that information has to be transmitted to the county, and that has to happen in very early August. So in order to essentially get the savings that we do by using the tax rolls to bill for this service, you need to ultimately take that action now. That's ultimately how we develop the recommendation to, while you're taking an action this evening, you are deferring the increase in rates for a 6-month period. Traditionally, the rates would increase on July 1st and then be paid for essentially in the 2 portions of your property tax bill. We're proposing that the increase not take effect until January 1st, and that savings, that reduction in the rate from July 1st through December 31st, that will ultimately result in a reduced number that would show up on the tax rolls.
Okay, thank you. There was also a question regarding a 5-year horizon versus a 3-year horizon.
Mr. Smith or Mr. Isaac, do you want to note that? As noted in the presentation, 5 years is the maximum amount of time that Prop 218 permits us to do. The council has directed us to do long-term planning of the assets and to develop long-term financial plans. The purpose of the 5-year rate program was to provide some stability over time so that we didn't end up with large, unusual increases in rates. Mr. Smith, is there any other items that I'm missing on the time frame, or Mr. Isaac?
This is Anthony Smith again. There are some minor cost savings in not doing large public noticing processes more frequently. There's a cost associated with that, as well as a cost associated with continuing to do rate studies. So there's a minor amount of cost savings by doing this in a 5-year window. In 2017, we did it a 3-year window, but again, Proposition 218 allows that 5-year window.
And that basically saves us money because we don't have to go through this whole process every 3 years. Instead, we can do it every 5 years.
That is correct, yes.
Okay, very good, thank you. Another question that came up in a number of the letters, and I'll just read directly from the letter. The sewer tax was subject to a big run-up to provide capacity for new developments, which should have paid for that capacity at no cost to pre-existing residents. Now, to the city manager, it's my understanding that the capacity for new developments was in fact paid for by those new developments, and it did not come from the existing ratepayers.
That is correct. For more than 30 years, the city has had a sewer connection fee. Actually, now it's almost 40 years. And so new development pays for all of the increased capacity, the larger pipes, the larger plant, the larger processes. All of those are purchased by essentially new development. So there is no, again, there's no cross subsidy from the existing ratepayers to those who want to join the system. They have to essentially buy into that system by paying a connection fee, and those fees are used for expansion of the system. The capital dollars that are discussed in tonight's presentation are replacement after the asset has worn out. That is shared equally by all of the ratepayers in the proportion that they actually utilize the service.
And I can't resist, but as part of the presentation tonight, it showed BOD, which was biochemical oxygen demand, and total suspended solids. And those go into the calculation because the more biochemical oxygen demand or total solids that a user uses, the rate that they pay is higher to accommodate the increased treatment that is required for the additional loading into the treatment plant. So it continues to spread the costs over to the people that are creating the greatest demand on the system. I see that
That is,
Councilmember Monroe has her hand raised.
This time for real. And I'm going to lower it now so I don't forget.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm going to keep. Yeah,
Raise it again.
this. There we go. This is really more of a comment. The more I think about, I want to express my appreciation to staff and to the consultants for the careful work that was done here in looking through. This isn't a choice. The question is, how do we do it in the most effective, cost-effective way for the city, which means for those who pay into it. And it's an enterprise fund. Those who use it pay into it. This is not a choice whether we can do it or not, because if we don't do it, then ultimately the system will fail. One of the signs of a society that works is a sewage system that works, because when that doesn't happen, I will refer you back to the Dark Ages and the 18th century and the 19th century. You actually want a sewage system that works. So this isn't a question of do we do it or not? It's a question of how do we do it? And I really just want to compliment the care that I've heard here in making this happen in a way that both respects the fact that we are going through a crisis now and at the same time recognizes that this is not a choice. So there.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Warner, your hand is raised.
Yes, I wanted to explore a little bit more what City Manager Mark Roberts said in answer to your question about whether this, whether the new development pays for the expanded capacity. And Mark, you said that it's nearly 40 years that that's been the case here in Livermore, that in fact the new development does. Is that true in all cities, or can you compare how we do it versus others?
Most medium-sized and larger cities that are experiencing any growth of any amount have a connection fee. It's a best practice in the industry. It is almost universal. Places where they don't have connection fees are places where they have, for example, either no growth or negative growth. Some large cities in the country don't have to build new capacity because their populations or their economic intensity is shrinking. But certainly in growing communities across both California and the nation, having some sort of connection fee is a best practice and is almost universal.
Well, when you said some sort, the real question was, do most cover the total cost of the expanded capacity? I think what I got from you is saying that we actually, our fee is such that it does cover the expanded capacity costs. So I'm really going for what percent of that expanded capacity is typically covered by those fees?
So you are correct that 100% of the cost of the expansion is covered in our fees, and it varies between areas what portion of the cost is covered. Some places recover less than 100% as an incentive to new development to come to the area. And I don't have detailed information, either state or nationwide, on what proportion. Perhaps Mr. Isaac has a little better understanding of that on a numerical basis. But certainly it's been the city's policy across the board for all type of impacts to fully recover the entire cost of new development so that existing ratepayers and taxpayers are not saddled with that burden.
So what I was trying to get at, that the comment that, that we should make sure that the expanded development is covered by the developers is a reasonable question, because that's not done everywhere. But here we do cover it completely.
That is correct.
This is Habib Isaac. We work on quite a few capacity fee updates, impact fee updates across the state. I do a couple in other states, but it's all pretty much the same premise. But with utilities, it's very, very common. I have worked on one where they subsidize the expansion through other revenues. The capacity fees are always recovering 100% of the expansion. And then when there's agencies or cities that are getting towards the end of their expansion needs, the methodology just changes. Their capacity fee doesn't go away. It just changes from a expansion to a buy-in component. So then, since the facility is already built, now the remaining development is just buying into the facilities already built. So it just kind of transitions into the methodology used as opposed to it goes away once all the facilities are built.
Very good, thank you. Seeing no further questions, just wanted to make a.
Yeah, I can't, John, I can't raise my hand, so.
Oh, okay, well then just speak right up, Mr. Carling.
I just wanted to, again, sort of follow on some of the earlier comments. I do think it should be recognized by the public that there are some other options that we could have considered here, and that is putting off the rate increase beyond January 1st, and that would have been a bigger hit. I think the mayor mentioned a $4.3 million hit that we're going to assume by putting it off 6 months. But if we had put it off a year or till the vaccine is available, it's many, many millions of dollars more. And I think we, city council members, weigh the pros and cons of those kinds of decisions and went with one that recognizes the COVID-19 environment we're in, recognize that many people are out of work, and have put off, suggested or agree with the city staff that January 1st is a reasonable time frame to consider. So, I mean, we just didn't, we, the staff and city council and so on, just didn't just pick this out of thin air. The other question that one of the other folks from comments asked about was what maintenance was completed over the last 3 years? And I think, Mr. City Manager, could you comment on that?
So we've had a number of capital improvement programs, projects that are out at the plant. And I've got two staff here that are likely to be more familiar with a number. I'll start with Sherry Sheets, my city engineer, to see whether we have been spending multiple $1 million, but I don't have the last couple of years off the top of my head. Sherry, do you have a number?
Yeah, so over the past, so this year we're spending about $10 million, and prior years ranged between $2.5 to $5 million per year.
You were doing chlorinator work and basin work, and I think we had a new sludge press that we purchased. There's been a lot of stuff going
yes,
on.
and a new grit, new aeration basins are going on right now. The emergency generator is being put in. We upgraded the electrical system. We've, well, I guess those are the major ones. We're also in the middle of replacing a major sewer line, main trunk line.
The point is that when we raised the rate 3 years ago, we had articulated the need for some capital maintenance then, which we've completed in the interim. Is that a fair statement?
That is true.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So just to expand a little bit on what Councilmember Munro mentioned, last Wednesday night, I was about 10:30 at night. I was working. Actually, ironically, I was working on responding to a number of emails from our constituents. And at 10:30 at night, the power went out. House went completely dark. The street went dark. I actually got into my car and drove around the city and found that there was a power failure that went from Mines Road to Ruby Hill. So I went home, and the only thing I could do was go to bed. And I started reflecting on what services cities provide. And that cities provide essential services. And these services are so essential that the voters elect the people to make the right decisions to ensure that those essential services continue uninterrupted. police, fire, public works, free libraries, but it's water and wastewater. And having worked in the water industry and wastewater industry for over 30 years, I can tell you that when a water system fails or a wastewater system fails, it's catastrophic. And this is essential. It cannot fail. Suddenly you've got 30,000 households and 6,000 businesses that can't flush. And that is catastrophic. And this is why we are elected to make the difficult decisions. Our executive director for iGate, Brandon Cardwell, gave me a great perspective recently. He said that the best time to plant a tree is 40 years ago. The next best time is today. Similarly, the best time to start collecting the replacement allowance for any system, any asset in the city is the day it's built. And that for a number of years hadn't happened. Now we've got an asset management committee that's looking at this. We're building up this more robust asset replacement program. But you might be able to say the best time to have raised this rate significantly was 10 years ago. But 10 years ago, we were in the middle of the worst recession in modern history. We're recovering from that. So there never really is a good time to say that now we're going to raise the rate. But we need to prevent the system from failing, because that is not an option. The longer we wait, the more expensive it's going to be. We just saw that Union Sand is raising theirs 45%. So we don't want to get into that position. We need to move judiciously. This is very well planned. This is something that we are collecting these assets so that we continue to replace the sewer system as it needs to be replaced before it fails catastrophically. I will tell you that as a member of the U.S. Conference of Mayors Water Task Force, I have seen cities that have been fined tens of millions of dollars because their systems have failed. This is not an option for Livermore. And this is a decision that doesn't come easily, but is a decision that has to be made. It's the right decision so that the system does not fail and we do keep up with it. So are there any other comments from the members of the council? With that, I'd be willing to entertain a motion.
I'll move.
Trish Munro, Councilmember Munro makes the motion.
I'll second. Coomber?
Mayor,
Yes.
I need to tabulate.
Oh, I'm
the
sorry. I'm
process.
sorry. Thank you. You need to tally the protests. So in that case, let's take let's say a 5 to 10 minute recess until the votes are tabulated, the number of protests, and then the city clerk can come back to me and we will come back live. So a 10-minute recess. Let me give TV 30 a moment. They went off to a break as well.
Sorry, did you say something about TV 30, sir? Your audio is kind of choppy.
Okay, so we're back up.
Oh, not yet. Are you ready?
We're all set to go.
Okay, and here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, live.
Okay, very good. Welcome back. We're back with a break from 1.
Honorable Mayor, your audio is not working.
It shows me I'm up.
Yeah, you're fading in and out.
Okay, how's this?
Better.
Okay, it's better. Okay, let me move a little bit closer to the computer. Okay, so with that, we took a brief break and we allowed time for the city clerk to tabulate the number of protests. I will now hand it off to the city clerk. Ms. Weber, what's the final tally on the number of written protests that we have per AB 218?
Thank you, Mayor. We received 127 valid protests out of a majority protest number of 16,002. So a majority protest does not exist.
Munro, and we got a second as well. Is there any on the motion? Okay, I'll ask the city clerk, roll call, please.
I'm sorry, Mayor, could you repeat the motion in a second? Your audio cut out again.
Sorry, it was the motion was made by Councilman Munro, and I believe it was seconded by Vice Mayor Warner.
No, I didn't second it.
Oh, was that
I think that was me.
okay, Councilmember Cooper. I saw Vice Mayor Warner's hand raised, but then you spoke up ahead of time. So motion was made by Councilmember Munro, seconded by Councilmember Cooper.
Thank you. Councilmember Carling?
Aye.
Councilmember Coomer?
Aye.
Councilmember Munro?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Warner?
Aye.
Mayor Marchand?
Aye. Tax rolls will be the increase on the tax rolls will begin moving on to
Can't hear you.
Mayor Marchand, we're still having trouble hearing you.
Oh, okay. Let's see. All right. So this is a hearing to adopt a resolution. This is 5.02. To authorize the city manager to sign the third amended and restated agreement with Livermore Sanitation, Inc. And this is for solid waste, recyclable materials, and compostable materials. This is for the adjustments for the effective January 1, 2021 and July 1, 2021.
John?
Yes.
It looks like when you turn to the side that the audio fades.
Okay, that's okay. Very good. I'm just reading from the agenda, so I'll try to direct my comments more directly toward the computer. So thank you. Okay, so with that, 5.02, the agreement with Livermore Sanitation. Carry this over to the city manager, Mr. Roberts.
Honorable Mayor and members of the City Council, I am Mark Roberts, your city manager, and I want to introduce Judy Erlinson from our Public Works Department, who is going to give us an overview of the contract extension that you gave us direction to negotiate. And we're here this evening for your consideration.
Yes, good evening, Mayor Marchand and members of the City Council. This item requests the City Council consider the third amended and restated agreement with Livermore Sanitation for solid waste, recyclable materials, and compostable materials services, to approve a 10-year term extension, including additional benefits and services for the community, and also approve the requested rate adjustments effective January 1st, 2021 and July 1st, 2021. In 2008, the city released a request for proposals for the collection of Livermore solid waste and recyclable materials. The city received 3 responses, and incumbent hauler Waste Management declined to submit a proposal to continue to serve the community. Ultimately, Livermore Sanitation, or LSI, was selected because the company offered enhanced services at the best price compared to the other proposers. The city entered into a 10-year agreement with LSI in 2009, with July 1st, 2010 as the effective start date. The city is now in year 10 of an initial 10-year term. In December 2017, the City Council authorized staff to negotiate with LSI for additional benefits and services for the community in exchange for an agreement extension, instead of issuing a new request for proposals, because of the comprehensive package of services provided by LSI and the expected rate increases and costs associated with procuring a new franchise agreement. In October 2019, city staff presented options to the City Council for term extensions and programmatic enhancements. The City Council then directed staff to negotiate a 10-year franchise agreement extension with the option to extend the agreement for up to an additional 5 years at the city's sole discretion in exchange for service enhancements for the community. The third amended and restated agreement for your consideration includes a 10-year initial term and several key benefits for the community. Specifically, LSI will purchase new vehicles and new containers will be phased in over time. Also, LSI will complete necessary upgrades to their compressed natural gas fueling station. Recyclable processing cost calculations will be modified and are expected to save ratepayers nearly $800,000 per year. Requirements and funding mechanisms are included to comply with new state regulatory mandates. LSI costs will be held constant for 2 rate periods, and rate increases will be limited to 1% for all ratepayers per year to fund a balancing account that would be used to offset future rate increases. LSI has agreed to delay the first 1% rate increase by 6 months to be effective January 1st, 2021, because of the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic for the rate period commencing July 1st, 2020. Rates would again increase by an additional 1% for all customers for the subsequent rate period beginning July 1st, 2021. The delay in the rate increase for the first year will reduce the balancing account by approximately $140,000. Other agreement enhancements include the expansion of the on-call pickup program to allow residents to place 1 mattress, box spring, or furniture item curbside at no extra cost. And ongoing services to temporary homeless encampments are also included. Staff recommends the City Council authorize the City Manager to execute the third amended and restated agreement with LSI to incorporate a 10-year term extension and additional benefits and services for the community, and approve the requested rate adjustments to be effective January 1st, 2021 and July 1st, 2021. Thank you for your consideration, and staff and LSI staff are available for questions.
Thank you. Any questions from the council? No, seeing none. No, I see no hands raised. In that case, let's go to the public hearing. Do we have cards or comments for the public hearing?
Have we received email or Zoom comments?
Yes, we have. We received email and Zoom. And I'll proceed to read the first email comment. This is from Stephen Dunbar, titled Agreement with Livermore Sanitation, Resolution 427-2020. Dear Mayor and City Council, happy late Earth Week. We at Tri-Valley Citizens Climate Education applaud the new requirement to provide compost pails to multifamily residents, along with other improvements in the proposed Livermore sanitation contract. We had some discussion with staff about the replacement of the refuse collection vehicles, which has been helpful in drafting the following requests. We are deeply concerned by the requirement to purchase new CNG-powered collection vehicles and a multi-million-dollar fueling station replacement, and we believe there is a better alternative. These are very large assets that will be running for at least a decade after their purchase, well into the 2030s. This has a long-range impact on Livermore meeting aggressive state of California goals on greenhouse gas reduction. City staff noted that electric vehicles are currently more expensive than CNG counterparts, and there may be potential range issues and backup power requirements. However, we are currently unconvinced that these concerns cannot be resolved. Staff sent a video of Palo Alto BYD collection truck. The battery capacity of that model has since increased 50%, and therefore the range may be viable now or in the next few years. Backup generators are available for electricity just as backup compressors are available for CNG, so potential blackouts from PG&E should not be a serious obstacle with appropriate design. There was also discussion that Livermore Sanitation would be pursuing renewable natural gas, but there is no contract requirement to do so, merely the statement to help the city comply with new state mandates in 2022. Moreover, battery electric trucks potentially have lower life cycle operating costs due to less engine and transmission maintenance, lower energy cost, and fewer brake jobs, which can offset the presumed higher initial cost. Beyond direct costs and operational concerns, battery electric presents many co-benefits and a brighter future than simply reinstalling CNG. These include lower noise levels, leveraging infrastructure with future zero-emission city vehicles, emergency power for critical city functions during projected PG&E blackouts, better acceleration and handling on the streets, and more. We are unsatisfied with doing the bare minimum and relying on state goals of the future. We should be striving for better. Therefore, we are requesting that the city provide flexibility in the contract to allow other vehicles and fueling types, delay the CNG purchases until a direct comparison can be presented with co-benefits to the new Climate Action Plan Committee to the City Council. Thank you for your consideration. Sincerely, the members of this Tri-Valley Citizens Climate Education, including Ann Brown, Stephen Dunbar, Tom Felter, Evan Brandling, Ron Sadler, Steve Ketzler, and Van Rainey. And I have a second email. This is from Tom Felter regarding Livermore City Council garbage contract 4/27/2020. Dear Mayor and City Council, I support Stephen Dunbar's letter regarding Livermore City Council garbage contract 4/27/2020. I would like to emphasize the importance of delaying the long-term contract to renew CNG garbage trucks. A short-term delay is needed to let the newly formed Climate Action Plan Advisory Panel weigh options. A lot has changed since the city analysis of the subject. Zero emission technology has improved and rapid improvement continues unabated. The long-term contract would commit the city to CNG-powered collection vehicles and a multi-million-dollar fueling station for at least a decade, well into the 2030s. This will interfere with long-range aggressive goals of the state on greenhouse gas reduction. Zero-emission vehicle technology is rapidly improving. I know at least 2 members of the advisory panel concerned about being left out of a discussion such an important long-reaching contract. It is unclear if city analyzed hybrid CNG, plug-in CNG, and current electric technology. In the short time frame from the city's analysis of the Palo Alto BYD truck to now, battery capacity increased 50% and range is therefore viable and rapidly improving. Although the price of battery trucks is 25% more expensive than CNG units, according to city analysis, it is unclear how amortization was figured. Battery trucks have lower operating cost, fewer brake jobs thanks to regenerative braking, and of course, greener and lower energy costs. Electric motors also have vastly increased service life compared to mechanically complex engines and transmissions. The city analysis deemed PG&E blackouts to be a liability with battery vehicles. However, it turns out the compression station required for the CNG approach costs about the same as standby electrical generators, which are inexpensive and reliable. Such generators at a battery truck fleet could help with the emergency power requirements. The battery truck charging station could help introduce additional electric vehicles to the city's fleet. One day, as the grid gets smarter, off-duty battery electric trucks might be used for load balancing and shifting. Moreover, the yard and buildings along with neighboring businesses might support a solar array that locally charges the trucks without incurring distribution charges as allowed by new regulations announced last week. Although renewable natural gas might be employed by LSI, there is no requirement. In any case, why use precious RNG when batteries will do? Isn't RNG better used where no other alternatives exist? For example, in diluting the fossil gas critical to many of our homes. Therefore, I suggest a delay in the contract until the advisory panel can consider emission reductions, future state requirements, routes and battery life, co-benefits such as reducing noise, facilitating future zero emission city vehicles, energy balancing, energy power during the PG&E blackouts, and more. Sincerely, Tom Felter, Livermore resident with family since 1980, retiree from Sandia and LLNL, Pedrosi Scholarship Foundation board member. And then, okay. Okay. And that's it.
Okay. So that's the public comment for tonight. So with that, I'm going to close the public comment period and bring it back to the city council. Any questions from the city council at this point? In that case, comments. Councilmember Munro, raise your hand.
Actually, it's a little bit of a delay. I was interested in having the comments raised by Stephen Dunbar and Tom Felter addressed. I hadn't thought about the idea that 10 years in changing technology around vehicles is a very long time. And I'm wondering how that could be addressed going forward. I remember that we did have discussion about this in the past, but not at this level of detail. So I'm wondering if we could talk about what electric technology might look like going forward, or if there's a way to incorporate that.
So, Councilmember Munro, yes, your staff did analyze that, and one of our challenges is that the fleet that is currently in use ultimately needs to be replaced. It's at or just beyond the end of its life. And so that's putting a time constraint on this. As you know, your staff has explored the use of electric vehicles both personally and on its city fleet. And I'm going to have Judy Orlinson give a little more background, and if we need a little more technical discussion as well, we do have representatives from LSI here. So Judy?
Yes, thanks, Mark. So trucks, it's important to order trucks now because of the long lead time. Several of the trucks are coming to the end of their useful life. However, there are a few trucks that aren't quite at the end of their useful life because they were purchased later during the initial term. And it's possible that the technology, electric or maybe some other type of technology, would reach a point where we could pilot some of these technologies when we purchase these vehicles in, say, 5 to 8 years when they reach the end of their useful life. One thing I did want to make sure to mention is that new state mandates require us to procure recovered organic waste. And one of the way we are going to meet that requirement is to purchase RNG, renewable natural gas. instead of CNG. And I just actually learned today that LSI has signed a contract with a vendor to provide RNG, soon to be from local California facilities, in order to meet that new state requirement, SB 1383.
So
Okay.
just to be clear, this is Bob Carling, just to be clear, the point both Mr. Dunbar and Mr. Felder made that RNG is not a requirement. They in fact are going to go forward with RNG?
That is correct, yes.
Great, thanks.
Any further comments from the council?
This is Bob Warner. I've got.
Vice Mayor Warner?
Yeah, I wanted to pursue that question about the flexibility going on in the future. Did I hear that there is a possibility that we could make the transition to some electric vehicles sooner than the expiration of this longer term that we're talking about?
You're fading in and out.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
My question was, did I hear it right that there is some option or potential to be purchasing some electric vehicles sooner than the end of this 10-year time frame?
Yes, that's correct. Oh, sorry.
And are we explicit on how we're going to think about that, and how many would be possible if the technology had the requisite range and was in the price range? I mean, how many of the fleet, let me put it this way, that you mentioned that haven't reached the end of their useful life, what percent of the vehicles are, say, the existing ones going to last for the next 5 years, for instance?
So of the total 42 fleet vehicles, 36 will be replaced now. So there's an opportunity to pilot or test future technologies going forward for 6 vehicles.
So how do we assure ourselves that we will go there?
So I think that one of the things to keep in mind, Vice Mayor, is what several of the commenters noted is you're about to embark on a process to update your climate action plan, and essentially the evaluation criteria, cost benefit analysis, and other essentially procedural steps could be outlined as a part of a goal of evaluating not only the contractor's fleet here, but the city's entire fleet, balancing sort of both the technology, the range, the usefulness, the initial cost, and the overall life cycle cost. And the proper, I think, way to do that would be to come up with that criteria and then have the council ultimately, as a part of your climate action plan, adopt that criteria. Once that criteria is adopted, the city would then implement that when those later vehicles came up for replacement, going through that process that you would have adopted or the recommendations that you would have adopted at that time.
So let me ask it this way then. So thank you for that. That if we approve this as asked for tonight, that we have reasonable assurance that we will be focused on converting this fleet to electric as soon as practical?
So first of all, this contract does not prohibit you from making those changes, especially for those later vehicles, especially if you ultimately adopt that as the direction that you want to go moving forward. So what we're hearing tonight is at least the direction, overall sentiment of the council. The way to ensure that that gets enforced is to ultimately adopt your new climate action plan, and then that would be the enforcement teeth.
Well, what I'm trying to say is when we adopt this, say we adopted this tonight, can we put an amendment in there, amending motion, just to emphasize the desire to make this transition as soon as practical and under the auspices of the climate action plan?
Certainly your direction this evening, we can absolutely take that as a minute order to be considering that. So it's not an either or, it's an and. There's nothing in the contract that would need to be amended. You have that flexibility to do that going forward.
Just an interesting point, I think. We just came through the sewer rate increase discussion, and a lot of people were concerned about the immediate cost. What our initial analysis showed was that the cost of going to electric increased the cost. It was 25% for electric vehicles. So it's a balance between the climate action considerations for the climate action plan, and at the same time being mindful of what buying a fleet of electric vehicles is going to cost. If it's going to add 25% ultimately to that rate. So this is part of the balancing act that we have to deal with. What's in the best interests of our climate action plan, but at the same time, we've got to be mindful of what the impact is going to be on the rates over the long term for the ratepayers, as we just heard in the last item.
One of the items that also was brought up is that the technology is changing very quickly, and in just another 36 or 48 months, when that next tranche of vehicles is ready to be replaced, the financial return on investment might be very different. The battery range may have increased, and essentially the truck chassis and other custom parts that are built on the backbone of an electric truck would have significantly changed. So I think in that time frame for that mid-range replacement of those units, you'll have a much more robust alternative on the electric side.
Well, I think that's important to have that flexibility component factored into the agreement. And it sounds like we have that already.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, very good.
Can I ask about that amendment? So I wasn't actually clear on the answer about the amendment. It sounded like we could do an amendment, but it wasn't necessary, or we could do a both and. Could you repeat that?
Yeah, so the direction is actually really to ourselves on that, which is we have input into the replacement of the vehicles. The vehicle replacement is part of our regulations. So from that perspective, you would be giving direction to staff this evening as in addition to approving the contract. So we'll certainly understand that essentially an analysis is expected, and then the exact methodology used would be better defined in your climate action plan. So that's why I was referring to it as you were doing, and you would be giving direction this evening, you'd be approving the contract that allows you to do it. And then the third step is you'd be approving the criteria, such as life cycle costs, greenhouse gas emission avoided, all of those criteria as a part of your ultimate climate action plan. And those things together, I think would get you to where you want to go, which is an efficient, effective, and climate sensitive fleet, especially with those products that could be replaced in the middle of this contract period.
Okay, does that satisfy your answer your question, Councilmember Munro?
I'm not actually sure. I guess my question is, should I make a motion or not?
Well, is there anyone
or
else?
Vice Mayor Warner, for that matter.
Vice Mayor Warner has raised his hand.
So I think I understood that the contract itself that we're being asked to approve has the flexibility in it, that you're hearing sufficient direction from the council tonight that we want to pursue the electric vehicle option as soon as practical, and that we would determine the criteria for that practicalness through the climate action plan. That's what I heard. So that what we need to do tonight is approve the contract. It's sufficiently flexible, and then we need to possibly on another agenda item make it clear that that's our intent, or is it sufficient? Is there some mechanism tonight to make it clear what I said is what we want to have happen?
Your direction essentially to explore the electric vehicles as a part of replacing the group of vehicles, which is mid-contract, is sufficient. So you don't need a separate item to do that. And you are correct. Your summary of the 3 items is correct.
So Vice Mayor Warner, based on the summary that you just provided, are you willing to provide present a motion?
Well, I move approval of the contract as requested in the staff report, with the clear proviso that we were going to address the electric vehicle option under the climate action plan.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilmember Carling, the motion made by Vice Mayor Warner. Is there any discussion on the motion? Roll call from the city clerk, please. Ms. Weber?
Councilmember Carling?
Aye.
Councilmember Coomer?
Aye.
Councilmember Munro?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Warner?
Aye.
Mayor Marchand?
Aye. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 5.03. This is the progress report on the housing element of the general plan. This is probably Trish Munro on this one.
Yes, it is. Good evening, Honorable Mayor. It is your city manager again, Mark Roberts, and we do have Ms. Ponto from our Community Development Department to give us a staff report on our annual progress report. Ms. Ponto?
All right, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, can you see my slides? Can everybody see them?
Yes.
Not yet.
Yes.
I can see them.
Yes.
Yes? Okay.
Hmm.
Mayor, can you see them?
I'm getting there. I'm looking at view options. Let's see. Go ahead and run. Go ahead and run it. I think I can get there.
Okay.
Yes, we got it.
Okay. So the housing element is one of the mandated elements of general plans in California, and its purpose is to help local governments adequately plan for existing and projected housing needs. The annual progress report, or APR, is a tool for tracking our progress towards meeting the goals and objectives in our housing element. The APR is due to the state every year on April 1st, and filing it on time keeps the city eligible for various housing grant programs. Typically, the city council reviews and accepts the APR prior to staff filing it with the state, but since council wasn't able to review it at the March 23rd meeting as scheduled, the state instructed staff to file the APR ahead of council review. So we went ahead and filed it on March 23rd, and then we will update the report with any changes made by council tonight. In previous years, the reporting requirements for APRs essentially included just the number of building permits issued by income level, and then a summary of our progress implementing housing programs included in our housing element. But due to new state legislation, there are additional reporting requirements for the 2018 and all future APRs. So now the state requires that we report information regarding all of the housing applications the city receives, how many of those units we approve or don't approve, how many units receive some form of readiness, which is typically a certificate of occupancy or a final building permit, whether any projects invoked the SB 35 streamlining process, whether any housing units were developed as part of a commercial development bonus, and then information about any sites that we rezoned to accommodate our RHNA targets. So RHNA is the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, which is the framework for quantifying housing need by income, and it's based on the state's projection of population growth for each region. The city of Livermore's share of the Bay Area's need from 2015 to 2022 is just over 2,700 units. And the city is not required to construct the housing, but it is required to show that there's enough land zoned for this amount of residential development within the city. The RHNA numbers are divided into income categories based on percentage of the area's median household income. The categories are extremely low, very low, low, moderate, and above moderate. We don't have a specific requirement for extremely low income housing units, so any units that are produced at this income level are grouped in with a very low income category. Tables A2 and B of the APR track the number of building permits issued for housing units in each of those income categories, including both market rate and affordable units. In 2019, the city issued building permits for a total of 341 units. About 3/4 of these units are considered above moderate, which is based on the actual sales prices of the units. And the vast majority of these units are attached housing types, including attached single family multifamily condominiums and apartments and attached ADUs. Staff anticipates issuing about 300 to 400 residential permits annually over the next several years due to construction of approved projects, although that may be affected by the COVID-19 restrictions and a possible economic recession. So at this rate, the city is on track to meet the overall RHNA target number, but the new housing is still heavily skewed towards the above moderate end of the affordability spectrum. Table D of the annual progress report tracks the status of the city's housing programs. To address the community need for more affordable housing at the lower income levels, the city allows and encourages accessory dwelling units, implements an inclusionary housing ordinance, and leverages local housing trust funds to increase the stock of affordable housing. In 2019, the city issued building permits for 36 accessory dwelling units, which qualify as moderate income units. And this is double the number that we issued permits for last year. 3 deed restricted units were dedicated to low and moderate income households as part of the inclusionary ordinance requirements. And then 42 affordable rental units were dedicated to low and moderate income households. So now I'm going to highlight some of the housing projects that are under review or under construction around the city. And the first is the Chestnut Square Senior Building, which completed construction this year. They had the grand opening ceremony on February 27th. This development includes 72 units. One is a manager's unit, and then 71 affordable rental units for seniors age 62 or older who qualify as low, very low, or extremely low income. 5 of the units were set aside for people experiencing homelessness, and there are on-site services for the residents. The family building of the Chestnut Square project began construction in 2019. And this project will contribute 42 units for low, very low, and extremely low income households, including 10 units for people experiencing homelessness. And it will also provide support services for these residents and community space with programming for youth. Also under construction is Auburn Grove, which is a development of 100 townhomes along First Street. This project includes 15 units for low and moderate income households. The Legacy Livermore project also began construction in 2019. The project will include 222 market rate rental units and approximately 14,000 square feet of retail space along First Street. Unfortunately, construction for this project is on hold due to the COVID-19 restrictions because it doesn't include any affordable units. In 2017, the city approved a proposal from Sunflower Hill and Mid-Penn Housing to develop 44 very low income units with on-site services for persons with developmental disabilities. And in 2019, staff worked with Mid-Penn Housing, which is the lead developer, to apply for tax credit financing. And then Mid-Penn was able to submit the building permit application for this development in November. So that's currently under review. The Vineyard Housing and Services site is also under review. The plan includes 24 affordable housing units and a supportive services center featuring the new Open Heart Kitchen facility. And in 2019, with the help of the city, the developer applied for and received over $6 million of the Alameda County A1 regional bond funding for the project. And staff is scheduled to present this project to the Planning Commission next month. In 2018, City Council approved a concept plan for downtown, which included approximately 130 workforce housing units. The city entered into an agreement with and provided a pre-development loan to Eden Housing to begin site planning for the project. And in 2019, with the help of the city, Eden applied for and received over $14 million of the Alameda County A1 regional bond funding for the project. And then finally, the city authorized staff to begin plans to rezone this 3-acre parcel adjacent to the Civic Center campus for an affordable senior housing project with a preference for veterans, and it would include up to 140 units. The city entered into an agreement with Satellite Affordable Housing Associates, or SAHA, and Interfaith Housing to begin site planning for the project. In 2019, staff worked on general plan and zoning map amendments to facilitate development of the project. And then also in 2019, with the help of the city, SAHA applied for and received approximately $4 million of the Alameda County A1 regional bond funding for the project. So staff recommends that City Council offer an opportunity for public comment and adopt a resolution accepting the 2019 annual progress report. Following the meeting, staff will file any changes to the report with the California Department of Housing and Community Development and the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. And that concludes my presentation, and I'm available for questions.
Very good, thank you. Any questions for Ms. Ponto? Councilmember Coomber.
Cooper here. I just want to know that are there any other delays related to COVID with the other developments that are still in progress?
So any of the projects that have inclusionary units or are completely affordable have been allowed to move forward. Any project which is market rate or has paid an inclusionary fee instead of actually building the units is currently on pause. So that's with the exception of the Chestnut project, which was highlighted in the presentation. All of your other housing projects across the city are on pause.
Councilmember Munro, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I thought this might be a good opportunity to talk a little bit about what the city's rate of growth actually is. I know that from time to time we hear that we're growing way too fast. So I thought that I thought this would be an opportunity to talk about what it actually is, and particularly relative to the current climate around housing. And then I had a second question, which was, at the opening of Chestnut Square, I know that there was some discussion around the difficulty in funding very low and low income projects. That one of the reasons that we have a gap, although it's so wonderful to see laid out the projects that we have underway, but the difficulty in funding, and I thought it might be useful to have a little discussion about that. So those would be my two questions. And actually along those lines, I would also add that I believe Vineyard is still looking for funding. So if anyone out there has money, this would be a good time to let us know.
So Councilmember Munro, your city manager again. I'm going to have our community development director, Paul Spence, give us a little more information on our recent growth rate overall, as well as information on what you noted, which is essentially all of the units which are below market requiring some level of subsidy.
This is Paul Spence, your community development director. And as you saw in the slide presentation, we are growing at a rate of 300 to 400 units a year on average, with a housing supply of 30,000 units plus or minus in Livermore. It shows you that our growth rate really is quite slow at this point. We are a maturing city. We have an urban growth boundary around the outside edges of our community. And while we still have some infill parcels that are available for development, for housing development, they are much fewer and farther between than they used to be. So there are some larger scale opportunities like the Isabel Neighborhood Plan, where we can proactively plan for housing, including affordable housing near transit. But there just aren't as many infill parcels as there used to be here in town. So the growth rate is quite modest at this point. And then in terms of affordable housing development, Mr. Roberts mentioned it, but all of our affordable projects really are subsidized by the city. We don't see for-profit developers voluntarily building affordable housing at the low or very low income levels. We have an inclusionary program that has quite successfully over the years added a great deal of affordable housing to our community, 15% on average for most of the community, combination of low and moderate income housing. And we've utilized that program. We've done swaps for land. Our housing manager at Gurenga has done some creative things in taking land and creating opportunities like the Chestnut Project. But those are all because of our inclusionary program. And unfortunately, we don't have the capacity to meet the low and very low income levels that the region would like communities like ours to be able to develop. We just don't have the capacity to build that many units through our program.
One of the most effective means of building affordable units was redevelopment. However, when redevelopment was eliminated, that very large funding source was eliminated as well. So there are no dedicated state funds that reliably come to the city to develop affordable housing. We do compete for grant funds, and those do vary year to year. As you saw in the annual report, we're very effective at competing because of all of the things that you all have put into place as part of our housing strategy. That makes us very competitive. And so we are able to compete for those grant funds, but there is not a dedicated statewide source of funding for affordable housing any longer, making it more difficult not only for our community, but for every community in the state to provide housing for all of its residents.
So the state
Thank
wants
you.
us to build more affordable housing, but they took away the mechanism that we had for it. Councilmember Monroe, do you still have comments? Your hand is still raised.
Once again, I have forgotten to take it down. I'll do that now.
No worries. Any other questions or comments from members of the council? Okay, do I have a motion to adopt the resolution to accept the plan, adopt accepting the housing element report?
I'll move.
Mayor,
Yes.
I'm sorry, did you want to open the public hearing?
Oh, I thought we already did that. I'm sorry. Yes, let me open the public hearing. Do we have public comments?
We do not, but still formality.
Thank you very much. Thanks for keeping me honest here. Okay, so I'm going to open the public hearing for 5.03. Seeing no public comment, I'm going to close the public comment period, bring it back to the council. Is there any further questions or comments from the council? Excellent report, by the way. Thank you very much, Ms. Ponto. Okay, in that case, I will entertain a motion to accept the 2019 Housing Element Annual Progress Report.
I'll make that motion, but I do see that there's in the question and answer, there is a comment. Does that count or not?
I'm sorry, we did just see that come in. We'll go ahead and read it now.
Okay.
From Stephen Dunbar.
Mm-hmm.
He says, just something I see in a lot in other cities and wanted to remind everyone, RHNA numbers are not an economic analysis, but an allocation. The state does not expect you to accomplish your numbers of low income numbers with above moderate development alone. It is expected that market rate development will come along with it at that 15% IZ that you have in certain areas. I just thought I would give that perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Certainly appreciate your comments and also from the previous item as well. Always appreciate your very well thought out comments. So with that, are there any further comments on for the public hearing? Okay, I will then again close the public hearing. Thank you again for the comments. Any further questions or comments from the City Council? We had a motion from Councilmember Monroe. Did we get a second on that?
I'll second it.
Okay, seconded by Vice Mayor Warner. Any discussion on the motion? Ms. Weber, roll call, please.
Councilmember Carling?
Aye.
Councilmember Coomer?
Aye.
Councilmember Monroe?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Warner?
Aye.
Mayor Marchand?
Aye. Thank you. Okay, so this is a little bit unusual. So normally around 9 o'clock, we take about a 5 or 10 minute break. Let me poll the council. You can just raise your hands. Do you guys want to take a break now, or shall we just forge through the rest of the agenda? Okay, I don't see any hands raised, so it looks like we will soldier on through the agenda. Moving on to 6.01. This is a resolution adopting criteria for the 2020 Mural Festival.
Good evening.
Honorable Mayor. Oh, there we go. Honorable Mayor, it's Mark Roberts, your city manager, and Adam Vandewater, your Director of Innovation and Economic Development, is here to give us the staff report.
Very good. Mr. Vandewater.
Good evening. Council members, I'm trying to share my screen with you. Is that working for you?
There we go.
So thank you. Good evening, Adam Vandewater, your Director of Innovation and Economic Development. For several years, the Commission for the Arts has budgeted funds to support a mural festival in Livermore as a means of beautifying blank concrete and cinder block walls downtown, engaging the public, enlivening street life, and further solidifying the connection between the arts and economic activity. Last fall, the Commission for the Arts received an application from Only Up LLC to plan and execute the 2020 Mural Festival in downtown Livermore during the spring and early summer of 2020. On September 24th, 2019, the Commission for the Arts recommended approval of, and on October 28th of that year, the City Council approved a policy and program grant in the amount of $10,000 to Only Up LLC to produce the 2020 Mural Festival. Since that time, of course, our world has fundamentally changed, and we have been sheltering in place for the last 6 weeks without a clear timeline for when a festival might safely occur. However, as the county and state begin to contemplate gradual changes to the shelter-in-place order throughout this summer, the governing criteria for the painting of the murals themselves remain unchanged from their February creation and must be adopted by the council prior to painting of the first mural. The event promoter, Trent Thompson of Only Up LLC, has indicated a desire to paint a select set of the murals for the requesting property owners once 3 conditions occur. 1, the council takes action, which we'll discuss here this evening. 2, the promoter and property owner agree on both funding and authority to complete the mural. And 3, the shelter-in-place order considers mural painting even if the festival element cannot also occur. Regarding the first condition, the criteria before you this evening include 11 conditions all murals must meet to receive city approval. First, the artist shall provide samples of previous work and a general theme for their proposed mural for review by the Commission for the Arts. Second, the murals must receive written permission from and assign intellectual property rights to the property owner. This is important as the underlying property owner may need to make amendments to that artwork to, for instance, fix the wall or maintain a leak or do something to preserve the integrity of the facade. 3, each mural shall be appropriate and engaging for its location, and the Commission for the Arts has a subcommittee that looked at these in different locations so that they engaged the public but did not distract the driver, for instance. That they not name specific people, parties, religious symbols, pornographic material, or otherwise obscene material. And we have some language in the specific resolution that's withstood court scrutiny on that topic. That they be compliant with the signage code. Our municipal code has prohibitions on advertising and promotion of the materials on site within and limits the square footage of those by site. Next is to be contemporary in design and aesthetically enhance the surrounding environment. Also to be designed with consideration of the safety of the public, created with permanent durable materials, to not be identical to murals already in existence within 200 miles of Livermore, be fade and UV resistant, and generally to the greatest extent possible graffiti resistant. I should mention here that one of the reasons for muraling some of these buildings is not only that artistic expression and connection to economic development, but it is typically a much lower maintenance cost, as they tend to get tagged on average about 90% less than a blank canvas wall might otherwise be. I should mention that any mural proposed for city property, and we had previously contemplated this portion of the Bankhead Theater downtown. It is not currently part of your actions this evening and would require future city council action if those were to move forward in a subsequent meeting. So for the evening, we're requesting adoption of a resolution before you in your packet, requesting 3 actions. One is establishing the criteria we've just described governing the murals to be included in this festival when and if it should occur. 2, delegating authority to the Commission for the Arts to approve murals that comply with these criteria above. And finally, authorizing the city manager to enter into all necessary permits and contracts, such as rights to enter across public property, etc. With that, I will complete my presentation and be available for any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So it sounds like heroic portraits of the members of the city council are out for this particular mural festival.
That's the proposal before you. The council can make any amendments they please.
No, I think the rules that you set down, the criteria are very good ones. Let's see, any questions at this point from the council?
I have one. Why 200 miles? Is that just arbitrary, or is there some method to your 200 miles?
That is a number that was come up with by the subcommittee for the Commission for the Arts in consultation with the promoter. They both wanted to produce something that was unique to the character of Livermore and was not something that other people would be familiar with. But is there magic to 200 versus 100? No, there's not.
Okay, thanks.
So along those lines, there's nothing in there that says unique to Livermore. And I'm wondering why not.
Correct. So the idea here is that we were initially contemplating 6 to 10 murals to be included in the festival with artists both local, regional, and in some cases international, which of course is much more difficult in our current environment, but that we would delegate to the Commission for the Arts to oversee those themes, and that those themes would largely be related both to the history of Livermore and to the history of that property owner. One example is there's a small wall at the back of the Chamber of Commerce that was interested in painting that as a history of commerce in the Livermore Valley.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Any further questions at this point? Okay, I'm going to open the public comment. Do we have any public comments for this item?
No comments have been received, Mayor.
Okay, seeing no comments, I'm going to close the public comment period. Do we have a motion to adopt a resolution to establish the governing criteria for the mural festival and authorize the Commission of the Arts to approve the final themes? For the question for the city attorney, do I need 3 motions or will you do it all in one?
Mr. Mayor, this is your city attorney, Jason. You can do one motion to move staff's recommendation, which includes the 3 separate items.
Okay, very good. So in that case, do we have a motion to move the staff recommendation?
I'll move staff recommendation.
Okay, Councilmember Carling makes the motion.
I'll second it.
Councilmember Coombs seconds the motion. Any discussion on the motion? Okay.
I do.
Yes.
I just want to say that in this current climate, thinking about having something that is this heartening going forward it really feels good.
To add some beauty to this this uncertain period of time. Absolutely. So we've got a motion, a second. Ms. Weber, roll call, please.
Councilmember Carling?
Aye.
Councilmember Coomer?
Aye.
Councilmember Munro?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Warner?
Aye.
Mayor Marchand?
Aye. Thank you. Moving on to 6.02. This is the confirmation and ratification of the Director of Emergency Services order enacting public nuisance ordinances.
Honorable Mayor and City Council members, it's your City Manager, Mark Roberts, and I want to introduce Jason Alcala, our City Attorney, who's going to lead us through this item.
Very good. Thank you, Mark. Good evening, Mayor Marchand and members of the City Council. My name is Jason Alcala, and I am your City Attorney. Tonight, I'm making the staff presentation for this item for amendments to the city's public nuisance ordinance and for confirmation of the order by the Director of Emergency Services enacting those ordinance. So there'll actually be 3 action items before you this evening. 1 is confirming the Director's emergency order. 2, adopting an urgency ordinance to keep those enactments in place pending the adoption of your 3rd item, which is the introduction of these ordinances in the ordinary course of business. Now, by way of introduction, the law of nuisances is based upon the concept that the exercise of one person's rights should not infringe upon another person's rights. More specifically, a nuisance is an activity or condition that interferes with another person's comfortable use or enjoyment of property or negatively affects another person's rights. In Livermore, this nuisance is intended to maintain the appearance of the community and to protect Livermore's quality of life, which is one of the primary reasons why the Enforcement Division is named Neighborhood Preservation. So what was this project? In 2018, you directed the Neighborhood Preservation Division to work with the City Attorney's Office to amend Chapter 8.14 in the city's municipal code. That chapter is entitled the Neighborhood Nuisance Abatement. That project was intended to improve the nuisance abatement process by more clearly defining the nuisance activities and conditions in Livermore, clearly stating the administrative process concludes when the hearing officer issues a written decision to uphold, modify, or set aside the abatement order, and providing additional tools to help the city recover its abatement costs. Now, to begin, Chapter 8.14 currently lists the activities and conditions that constitute public nuisances in Livermore. Specifically, that's Section 8.14.020 and its items A through H. Now, while that list is relatively brief, in practice it encompasses a broad range of nuisance activities and conditions. The amendments before you contain Neighborhood Preservation's list of activities and conditions that they currently investigate and abate as public nuisances under the current ordinance. That is, the amendment reflects the current enforcement posture and definitions of public nuisances in Livermore. For example, the old ordinance states that the accumulation of litter or debris is a nuisance, whereas the amendments to the new ordinance provide a comprehensive list of 11 categories of junk, trash, or debris that constitute a public nuisance if allowed to accumulate on property in Livermore. In addition to defining public nuisances, the existing ordinance includes an abatement process that provides notice to the responsible party and an administrative hearing before a neutral third party. It also allows the city to abate the nuisance if it is not voluntarily abated by the responsible party. It also includes the ability for the city to assess a tax lien against the responsible party's property to recover the city's abatement costs. The new ordinance provides a more comprehensive abatement process that, 1, affords better defined due process rights to the responsible party, 2, guides the administrative hearing officer's decision-making process to lead to written orders that uphold, modify, or set aside the notice and order to abate, and 3, concludes the administrative process once the hearing officer issues his or her written decision. The nuisance ordinance also allows the city to recover its abatement costs through either an assessment lien, which will be due when the property taxes are due, or by a judgment lien, which is due when the property is sold or at some earlier date agreed to by the properties, both of which are authorized by the government code, but currently we only have one of those tools in our existing ordinance. By example, the city has used the judgment lien process in the past. Specifically, we had a senior resident who lacked the funds to abate a public nuisance, but did have significant home equity. In that situation, the tool enabled her to have the nuisance abated now, and for the city to recover its abatement costs later, when the home was sold, and in this case, after she had passed away. So what is the usual abatement process? Generally, it has 3 distinct phases, and it's employed by the Neighborhood Preservation Division. The first phase is receiving a complaint, in which the Neighborhood Preservation officers respond and investigate to determine 1, whether the activity or condition exists, and if so, 2, is it a public nuisance. They then engage in an education campaign to seek voluntary compliance, which includes a letter writing campaign and meeting with the responsible party. If that is unsuccessful, the abatement process moves to the second phase. That phase involves issuing compliance orders and administrative citations, which are essentially fines, to increase the pressure to encourage the responsible party to voluntarily abate the nuisance. Those phases of voluntary compliance will essentially remain in place with these amendments, and these amendments, however, focus on the third phase, which is a transition from the voluntary abatement phase to the compelled abatement phase. The amendments propose issuing a notice and order to abate, which is the primary focus of the changes in the amendments, to make that transition. The primary changes being that the due process rights and responsibilities of the responsible party, the enforcement officer, and the hearing officer are more clearly defined, and the final step to abate the nuisance, either by the responsible party or the city, is more clearly defined. So what do the proposed amendments before you do? Essentially, they divide the existing ordinance into two separate chapters. Right now, Chapter 8.14 is the neighborhood nuisance abatement. It has both the definition of the nuisances as well as the abatement process. The proposed amendments divide that into two new chapters. 8.14, which is the public nuisances, which defines those existing conditions or those conditions that do qualify as a public nuisance in Livermore. And 8.15, which is a procedure for the abatement of those public nuisances. Focusing on Chapter 8.14, this chapter again defines the various activities and conditions that constitute a nuisance in Livermore. It's a comprehensive list of the conditions activity was prepared by the Neighborhood Preservation Division to identify those conditions that they currently abate under the existing ordinance. So it is a reflection of the current practice that is developed, but it provides greater clarity to both the public and the enforcement officers when defining what is and is not a public nuisance. It does it by grouping the nuisance into various categories that are set forth in the new ordinance: landscaping and vegetation nuisances, waste nuisances, maintenance of property nuisances, vehicle and vehicle repair nuisances, land use nuisances, emergency proclamations and orders, vectors and graffiti, and etc. Turning to Chapter 8.15, this chapter outlines the due process afforded to the responsible parties that are subject to an investigation and an abatement action. The amendments clarify again how the abatement process integrates with the administrative citation process, which is a separate ordinance we have in our books, which is your fines, but speaks to if there's an appeal or a hearing, how those two get consolidated into one due process, opposed to what we currently have are two parallel processes that don't necessarily coincide with each other. So again, the enhanced notice and order to abate process ends with either the order being set aside by a hearing officer or the abatement of the nuisance by the responsible party or the city. Now, you may ask, why were the amendments enacted by the Director of Emergency Services during this COVID-19 pandemic? The Director of Emergency Services enacted these amendments so they could be used to abate violations of the local public health orders that have been issued in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Those orders have been, the nuisance ordinance had been prepared by staff to bring to you at this meeting, but we rolled it out early, so we had a tool to actually implement and enforce those orders. Now, the orders by the Alameda County Public Health Officer may be enforced criminally. Now, what does that mean? That's through arrest and criminal prosecution. But it remains uncertain at this point whether the district attorney would actually prosecute those in criminal courts or how receptive they would be to those type of prosecutions. Therefore, the director asked for an additional tool to address violations through public nuisance abatement, which includes administrative citations, infraction citations, civil abatement, rather than criminal prosecution. All of which all those administrative processes all remain within the city's control, so we don't need to rely upon the criminal court system or the district attorney. Now, to be clear, the amendments do not preclude criminal prosecution of violations of the health orders, but they do provide an alternative enforcement mechanism and a process to obtain compliance. Now, since the amendments were enacted by an emergency order, they need to be confirmed by the City Council. In addition, since it is an emergency order, it only lasts through the duration of the emergency. So once the emergency expires or it ends, so with this order. That's why you have a second item on your agenda today, which is to adopt an urgency ordinance, to have these amendments go into effect immediately, which would survive the end of the event. That's important because you may initiate a prosecution or a civil abatement process during the emergency event, but those prosecutions may continue after the event terminates. So the urgency ordinance will provide that protection during that bubble. And then lastly, the third item before you is to introduce these amendments in the ordinary course of business, which would requesting you today to introduce an ordinance in the ordinary course, which would then come back just next meeting for adoption, and then would go into effect 30 days later. In addition to these ordinances before you, the Neighborhood Preservation Division is continuing its work with the City Attorney's Office to prepare a fee study for the abatement charge that will be imposed in the abatement process transitions from voluntary abatement to the compelled abatement process. 2, to amend the city's dangerous building ordinance, and 3, prepare a summary graffiti abatement ordinance as well. Those will return and be presented to you later this year and will require some tweaking to transition from what's more generally in existing amendments before you today to the more specific, which will be in these other ordinances. It's also important to note that the code enforcement process is dynamic. So if new conditions are discovered and that are not covered by the existing amendments, but those conditions do negatively affect the quality of life in Livermore, those conditions and activities can be incorporated into subsequent amendments into the nuisance ordinance for enforcement in the future. So before you today, we have recommended actions, which are, let's see if I can call this up on my webpage here. There we go. Okay. Which are to, let's see, make that go. To adopt a resolution confirming the Director's Order 20-40, adopt an urgency order amending and restating Chapter 8.14 as stated herein, and introduce an ordinance for first reading, which will ultimately be codified into your municipal code. So that's a general presentation of what's contained in these ordinances. I can do a deeper dive if you have specific questions in certain areas. Otherwise, that concludes my presentation, and I'm available for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Alcala. Bringing it back to the council, are there any questions that the council has at this point? See no hands raised, no questions. With that, I'm going to open the public comment period. Do we have any public comments for 6.02?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Ms. Elam?
All right, so we have an email that was sent in. This commenter submitted comments twice. So as our policy, I will read the most current submittal. This is from Patrick Quayle. He writes, I am emailing the longer version of my comments regarding 6.02, confirmation and ratification of Director of Emergency Services order enacting public nuisance ordinances, emergency measures enacting public nuisance ordinances, introduction of public nuisance ordinances. It includes suggestions for incorporation in the ordinances, processes for citizens reporting and enforcement, to revise the regulations regarding vehicles overstaying the 72-hour limit for parking on the streets of the recommendation of the abandoned vehicle hotline person. After multiple calls to address this ongoing, long-standing chronic problem, my neighbor at 1375 Calais, C-A-L-A-I-S Avenue, Calais, thank you, parks his large 53-foot-long truck trailer combination rig partly in front of my house and routinely overstays the 72-hour limit. He knows the city rules and abuses them. The situation began after he moved in around January 17th. His email does include a 10-page attachment, which was part of the supplemental that you received today. And that's all I have for the email. And we currently do not have anything for Zoom. Check on YouTube.
Okay, and if there's nothing on YouTube, then I will bring it. Anything on YouTube?
There's no comments on YouTube.
Okay, very good. In that case, I'm going to close the public comment period and bring it back to the council. Any questions or comments from the council at this point?
Yeah, Bob Warner.
Okay, Vice Mayor.
Given Mr. Coyle's comment, I'm wondering, it's my understanding, I want the city attorney to confirm that the situation described there of a vehicle that length being parked more than 72 hours is currently against the, prohibited by the ordinances, and it's also prohibited in this one. Is that correct?
So, Vice Mayor Warner, this is your city attorney, Jason. The vehicle code does have a rule that can be imposed, which is you can't park a vehicle for more than 72 hours, and then it becomes deemed an abandoned vehicle. The police department does have an abandoned vehicle program that responds to that, and it is something that would be could be abated through this nuisance process. I'm not sure if Chief Harris is on the call today, but he may be able to provide additional information concerning their practices.
My question is then, if he is available, is if someone submits a complaint and says this vehicle has been here more than 72 hours, how long does it take for someone official from the city to come out, verify it, and on average start the nuisance abatement process?
Chief Harris, if you can go ahead and give the Vice Mayor a little background on our process.
Sure, this is Chief Harris. And the question you're asking is surrounding involving our abandoned vehicle abatement program. And the system is set up so that when people observe a vehicle that appears either abandoned or has been parked for over 72 hours on the roadway, they call either our abandoned vehicle hotline and leave a message, or they can report that as well online on our website. We have a dedicated community service specialist assigned to this task, and also under normal circumstances, a specially trained volunteer that assists. And they work weekdays, and daily they will check those lines and the website for reports. And in addition to their proactive efforts in the community, they'll also respond to those complaints and go out and contact, go and look to see if the vehicle is still there, first of all, try and identify the owner and try and abate the issue right then by contacting the owner. So usually from the time they get the message to the time they respond is within a day or so, depending on which day of the week that call came in and days off and such. If they can't get the situation resolved, then they tag the vehicle, and the clock starts at that point, actually, the 72-hour clock. And then they'll come back 72 hours later, and if the vehicle is still there and hasn't been abated, then or moved, then it could be towed. Under our current COVID-19 emergency, the situation has changed quite a bit, not just with AVA, but with a lot of our activity is a little bit more reactive, and so also with the shelter-in-place order, residents were concerned that their vehicles would be towed if left on the street when they aren't able to, by way of the order, legally go out and move them. So staff's direction was given to staff to respond and deal with obviously abandoned vehicles mainly, and also to try and abate any other problems by contacting owners of vehicles and resolving the situation versus towing vehicles for now. So the other thing that has happened is all of our staff had to adjust schedules because of the emergency, and to go on to 4 days working and 4 days off. And so our CSS that handles and deals primarily with the abandoned vehicles is on a new schedule. And so it could be that that calls could go a little bit longer than they have in the past because of this. But hopefully we're going to get through this and get back to normal as soon as possible.
Well, thank you. And I would presume that given the situation that enforcement might be different, but I was speaking mostly into the future once we settle back down. The last question that I have related to this, given that it could be, from what you just said, a day or two from when the clock starts. But is there any potential for a repeat offender to be dealt with more timely?
Well, certainly in any situation where a vehicle would be like a danger of any kind, like it's up on jacks or it's partially out in the roadway or it's on somebody's property blocking a driveway, anything like that, we certainly would hope to dispatch someone immediately to deal with. But typically, if it's a car parked, a lot of times it ends up being a neighborhood or a neighbor calling on another neighbor, and so it's not necessarily a priority. It's something that is important and we want to deal with, but it's not like a priority one type of call. So it will hold until there's an available person to handle it.
Okay, well, thank you. Those are my questions.
Just a follow-up
I'd like
on that.
to,
Oh, yes, Councilmember Carling.
yeah, thanks. As I understand it, because so I rode my bike past Mr. Coyle's house today to see what this thing looked like, and it is, I assume it's 53 feet based on his, what he stated. And it is really long, but there's nothing in the ordinance, the city ordinance, that talks about length. I think that's true. Is that right?
That is correct.
So I think his complaint, as much as anything, is because it's so long and takes up so much space in front of his neighbor's house. And occasionally, I think, hangs over into his driveway, although I don't think it ever completely blocks his driveway. When I went by today, it was kind of blocking the person that owns this thing, partially blocking their driveway. So I think that's one of the challenges, is that my guess is that Mr. Coyle probably wouldn't be complaining if somebody's pickup truck was parked in front of his neighbor's house for more than 72 hours. I think it's the size of this thing that's objectionable as much as anything, and there's nothing in the ordinance as it's written today that prohibits that, as I understand it.
Well, just a quick question. Isn't there currently an ordinance that recreational vehicles, the RVs, trailers, and those sorts of things are not to be stored routinely in neighborhoods, that they have to be stored off-site?
I know that there are in many communities. I'm not familiar with
We used to have an ordinance here. There used to be an ordinance where you couldn't store RVs in neighborhood unless they were either they were off the street. A lot of homes I see have driveways behind the fence, so people store RVs behind the fence. But I thought we used to have an ordinance that said you couldn't store RVs routinely in residential neighborhoods. A little help there, Mr. City Attorney?
Certainly. So I do believe the city does have an RV ordinance on its books. It is incorporated into the nuisance ordinance before you. It does incorporate those sections that were identified by neighborhood preservation with regard to vehicles and vehicle nuisances. That is in section, let me find it here, subsection D, and it's subsection D5. It makes references to the municipal code as well as two sections of the development code as well as 10.48. So there are other standards in the municipal code that are compiled into this ordinance. But getting back to Councilmember Carling's question, no, there's nothing in there that specifically prohibits a trailer of a certain length. We do deal with RVs. We did look at this several years ago when the RV ordinance was drafted, trying to define, do you want to focus on RVs or the length of the vehicles? The direction at that time was to focus on RVs because it had the living component.
Well, it is an RV. The thing that Mr. Coyle is complaining about is an RV.
Okay, I did not know that.
Yeah.
So it seems like you go at this from the RV, not so much an abandoned vehicle, but that the fact that it's an illegally parked RV in a residential neighborhood.
Yeah, so there are a number of ways to skin a cat through public nuisance. It is a cat and mouse game at times. If the case were filed with, the complaint were filed with neighbor preservation, they would approach it from all angles. Other angles that appear to be potentially available for this particular case may be a violation of a home occupancy permit. So there's a number of ways to evaluate a particular nuisance when you have a business vehicle in a neighborhood. That is different than someone who drives it from their daily vehicle to and from work. But if it's part of a business that's operating out of a house, that's another opportunity. So if what we could do is the ordinance before you does incorporate neighbor preservation's list of items they do currently enforce. If there's a desire to review their practices, how they reactively pursue and investigate for violations in commercial areas, and proactively evaluate and investigate for violations in commercial areas, or reactively respond to neighborhoods, that could be returned at another date as well, so that you can review their practices with them and provide guidance on how you'd like them to proceed.
So could I ask another question here, sort of clarify? There's a, I'm not sure I understood or have the same understanding as Councilmember Carling. My understanding was that the current ordinance prohibits this vehicle. The current ordinance only doesn't speak to length, it speaks to time. So even though this vehicle is kind of obnoxious, and that's the reason why there's the complaint, even if it doesn't matter what the length of the vehicle is, it can't be there more than 72 hours. That's my understanding. Is that correct?
So again, the 72 hours is in the vehicle code. So that's set for the vehicle code, which is incorporated into the city's ordinance as a nuisance. So yes. So, but with regard to the 72 hour, and I think the chief would respond to this as well, the cat and mouse games that starts is they'll drive around the block and park in a different location. So there's, again, the process for code abasement is a long and torturous process at times. We do seek voluntary compliance, but there are a number of tools that we have at our disposal. The ordinance before you and the amendments do provide more effective tools to respond, but again, it is dynamic. If this does become a present issue, not just for this particular neighbor-on-neighbor dispute or in this particular neighborhood, but if it is throughout the community, clearly you have the opportunity to have staff respond, return to you so you can declare a particular activity or condition to be a public nuisance. That can be added to what you have before you today.
Okay, so thank you for that. So what I think you said is that this is a situation, if it persists, we can look into further and review the procedures that we have. Is that correct?
Correct. You would, at this one, the procedures are how you abate the violation itself. I think on this one, you'd be looking, declaring what is the condition or activity that constitutes a public nuisance.
Yeah, that's what I meant to say. Not only the procedures, but actually the specifics of the what is a nuisance. So so this is a good thing to do tonight with all this work you've put into it. And we may not be hearing the last of this situation, and we have the opportunity to pursue it further if necessary. That's my understanding.
Certainly. As I mentioned previously, code enforcement and abatement is a dynamic process. If there's something that's not clearly covered by the existing ordinances or codes, it can always be revisited and be brought back to the City Council to make a specific declaration that a particular activity or condition is a nuisance per se.
So with that, I'll move the recommended action of those 3 parts.
Okay, any further discussion before we accept the motion? Moved by Vice Mayor Warner.
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilmember Carling. And just a point, I'd like to point out that there is a, oh, don't get it here, there is. There's an app, a smartphone app that people can get. It's a free app that's available from the Apple Store. And it's a Livermore app where you can report nuisances like graffiti or potholes, weeds, those sorts of things. So you can use this Livermore app to report these types of nuisances. So it's if you're out in the community and you see something, you can pull out your smartphone and report it to the city.
As
So with that,
as an Android user, I must ask, is it also available on Android?
you know what? Check the App Store and see if you can find it. It's a free Livermore app. So check that one out. We'll we'll ask the folks on IT if it's also available. So great. Well,
Yes,
thank you.
Councilmember Monroe.
Oh,
it is.
Thank
This
you.
is Doug Alessio, your Administrative Services Director. It is available in Android.
Always want parity. Thank you.
very good. Thank you very much for that. So with that, we have a motion and a second. Ask Ms. Weber to roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Carling,
Aye.
Councilmember Coomer,
Aye.
Councilmember Monroe,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Warner,
Aye.
Mayor Marchand.
Aye. Good. Thank you very much for that. Now moving to 7.0. This is matters initiated and council reports. We haven't done this one in a while. So we've all been busy. I know that. Zoom has become my new best friend. So let's start with Councilmember Coomber. You're on my far left.
There you go. Yeah, I have nothing. I have at this point nothing of either.
All right. Let's go with Councilmember Monroe.
Hi. Shoot, I just lost. I'm back here. So I had two things that I wanted to ask about matters initiated. And then I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about East Bay Community Choice Energy rather than listing the activities I've done from my shelter in place through Zoom. Over the last few weeks, there's through one forum and another, I've been thinking about how we go forward with this. And one of the areas it seems to me we could address as a city has to do with the digital divide. And with the library closed, we're seeing a place where public access to wireless no longer exists. We know that the schools are passing out hotspots, but hotspots cost money going forward. And I'm wondering whether we could have, we could investigate the possibility of internet or connectivity, whatever that means. I'm not sure my language is exactly right, access to the internet, wireless, whatever. But it seems to me in the 21st century, that is a matter of public infrastructure. And I'd like to see if we could look at that and bring that back for the council to think about. So anybody else want to go in on that?
You can just show your hand, show of hands. Okay,
I'm
I see
okay.
1, 2.
I'm okay.
Okay, we got you got a unanimous there.
Fantastic.
So
All right.
come back and bring that more information back to the council.
Well,
Right,
your staff will be able to do that, as you might imagine. That'll be on the list, but it'll take us a little longer than normal to respond on that.
Yeah, I would imagine something going on. So the other just came up. I noticed that somebody wanted to make a public comment, and I guess got it in a little bit late, but it seemed like a good idea, and I actually was on my mind as well. And that is some cities have closed city streets to provide spaces for people to come out and have some access. The comment was that some of the trails are getting really well used. Could we do that? Seems to me like, is that a possibility? Could we make some of that happen? Might be a way to continue physical distancing with a little more sociability.
So one of the challenges with that, when you move beyond the neighborhoods, is that you still do have traffic on the streets. And so we've had, depending on where it is in the Bay Area, some folks have been able to do that relatively successfully. It is staff intensive to both do the analysis and to actually make sure that things like cones, barriers, and other things are appropriately in place. So, at this point, while that is possible that that would take some fairly significant resources from us here that would be difficult to deal with in the short run.
Okay. All right. Well, I would love to see that go forward, but it sounds like not a good option right now. That
one of the things we are exploring, especially as we transition back, and it's going to be over a long period of time, or in other words, not days, essentially more like months, is perhaps closing some area to parking and or traffic in the downtown area to deal with the fact that there'll be, in some cases, fewer cars to park and travel down there, and in other cases, essentially the need to spread some of the uses out in a much bigger area. For example, outdoor dining taking a lot more space than it traditionally would. So I think we may end up with some areas that were originally or traditionally set aside for vehicles or vehicle either storage or travel that might create some of the spaces that allow people to have an experience in the public area. And that might actually last over a longer period of time than the first stage shelter in place. So I certainly understand the objective, and we'll look for ways to implement that in a safe and cost-efficient way as we move forward. So maybe that's a way we could do some of what is being requested.
Okay. All right. And then I wanted to turn to East Bay Community Choice Energy, and so that's what supplies energy to Alameda County, including most of Livermore. It's the community choice. So it's the energy aggregator, and what it does, taken directly from its website, is to provide cleaner, greener energy at competitive rates, and then it reinvests earnings back into the community for local green energy jobs, local programs, and clean power projects. And so I sit on the board of directors, as you know, that's one of my outside Livermore jobs. Over the last year and a half, what EBC has done is working towards developing sources for energy that are wind and solar, so clean and green. In terms of investing back in the community, we've just seen, in response to throughout the entire Alameda County, EBCE has given $1 million very specifically to some of the Livermore projects. They've given $70,000 to Tri-Valley Haven, City Serve, and Open Heart Kitchen to help them in efforts to mitigate the current current crisis. Sorry. What I wanted to talk a little bit about, though, is that how we think about where we get energy from, because over the last couple of months, there have been some real confusion from various places in Alameda County, mostly not Livermore, but I suspect education's not a bad thing regardless, in terms of how this happens. And so what happens is different sources of energy are energy generation go into a big pot, and that pot then goes out into electricity. So it could come from natural gas, which is not terribly clean. It could go from nuclear, which has its own issues of cleanliness or not. It could be from hydro, it could be from wind, it could be from solar. And so when companies buy that, so when EBCE buys that, it can choose to buy one form of energy or another. Wind and solar are completely carbon-free. Natural gas is neither. Over the last several months, EBCE has been debating, has been given an option for where it buys its energy from is PG&E. One of the options has been to take nuclear power from Diablo Canyon. Again, the Diablo Canyon is generating nuclear power. This isn't about whether you like or don't like nuclear power, but how much it costs. So it's a question of juggling factors. If, for example, you took natural gas and it was the cheapest but the dirtiest, you might still buy it because the money saved by buying it could then be used to buy a local wind farm. Or you could choose to spend on wind because people's lungs matter all the time and markets will respond to pressure. Over the this last Wednesday, there was a particularly hot meeting around whether or not to take the nuclear option. Ultimately, EBC, the board of directors, chose not to. I'm not terribly fond of nuclear power. The waste disposal problem is kind of a deal breaker, but I don't get to close Diablo Canyon. Nothing we do here is going to close Diablo Canyon. And so the question is, when you think about dirty energy, what does that mean? Here's what we ended up doing is we have, again, no control over the Diablo Canyon operation. It's going to operate regardless. Once power is generated, it's just power. The electrons don't get labeled with hydro, wind, or nuclear when they come into your power your computer. However, the sources do generate. So what we ended up doing is taking just hydro and no nuclear. There's a natural gas plant in Hayward, which is neither, it's not clean energy. So that will have environmental impacts, not a huge number of environmental impacts, but some, and they're real. They're not hypothetical. They're not symbolic. Second of all, this is going to cost a little bit more, not a huge amount for the company, but it's going to cost an additional $1 million. I just said that $1 million was given to support community grants. That money could have been an additional $2 million, but it's not. So I'm concerned that people understand, number one, that we only have control over where we buy from, that when we make decisions, we're making them for reasons that are actually what we can control, and that we are ultimately going forward to build the community and to build to build a future which is going to be cleaner and greener. I voted against it. It passed regardless, but I wanted to explain that, and I really hope that people understand. With that, I'm done.
Great, thank you very much. Councilmember Carling.
Yes, thank you. I've had a couple of stop waste meetings since the last time we had these discussions. Again, via Zoom. Just to give you a sense, there's 20 plus board members representing various agencies within Alameda County, and it's an interesting juggling act by the president of the board to get through those meetings, but it works pretty well, actually. I just wanted to spend another couple of minutes updating folks on what the city staff is doing regarding homeless. I had a teleconference call with Christine Martin and Josh Thurman last Friday, and I thought some things had changed since we put out that written document from the city that Trish and I authored about the homeless. So I thought I'd bring people up to speed. But one of the things that was in abeyance at the time we wrote that was that the showers and laundry had been closed down at Asbury Methodist because of the pandemic. But since then, the city took it upon themselves to hire an industrial hygienist who developed policies and procedures that would allow the reopening of the showers and laundry at Asbury. And that kind of information wasn't available. And fortunately, we hired somebody that was able to put together, again, policies and procedures, and the city has shared that with other agencies throughout the county if they thought that particular type of information would be helpful to them in terms of making sure that showers and laundry facilities were clean and sanitary for each of the people that were there to use it. The showers and laundry are now reopened at Asbury for 3 days a week, and there are staff on site there to help monitor the folks that are using the showers and laundry. I'd also point out that Open Heart Kitchen is now passing out meals again in a different method. They are now serving drive-up meals. You can get your meals as you drive up to Robert Livermore Community Center, and Open Heart Kitchen is now serving about 150 meals a day, every day of the week. So again, people are reaching out to Open Heart Kitchen and taking advantage of that particular effort. In terms of where people stay, there's about 31 people in formerly homeless that are staying in hotels in Pleasanton and Livermore. And again, these are people that have been recommended through one or sundry different agencies like CityServe, for example. And again, trying to deal with the most vulnerable people out there in our homeless population that could be exposed to this virus. So those are just a couple of several, two or three things that that I thought would be updated. Oh, one more thing. We did purchase additional hand washing stations and put them in a couple of different locations in the city. So again, trying to deal with COVID for those that are least able to help themselves, that is the folks, our unsheltered neighbors. So again, city staff is working tirelessly, and Josh Thurman's a new employee and has gotten thrown into this, welcome to city government. And I think he started at about the time that we sheltered in place. So again, he's doing a great job, and appreciate Christine and Josh and all the other folks that are working with Eric and his group to dealing with our unsheltered neighbors. So thank you. You need to unmute, John.
There you go. Thank you. Yeah, so, well, thank you, Councilmember Carling, for the update. Josh Thurman came to us from Supervisor Haggerty's office, so he was really able to hit the deck running. So he's a great asset to have on board. Thank you for recognizing that. Vice Mayor Warner.
A couple of things to report. One is I hosted a town hall on economic development and small business assistance last week. And the panelists were Adam Vandewater, the director of the city's Office of Innovation and Economic Development, Don Argula, CEO and president of the Livermore Valley Chamber of Commerce, Marlo Schindler, public information officer and assistant district director for lending relations at the U.S. Small Business Association's San Francisco district office, and Rochelle Snedecor from Livermore Downtown, Inc. It was a lot of information, and it's been recorded, and people can go look at that on the city's website. One of the astounding numbers is just how much the Small Business Administration has been pushing out in loans. I think in just a few weeks put out a year or two's worth of loans. So it was phenomenal. And I think Adam talked about all the different people, local businesses that have done really good things, gave them shout outs. And then both Rochelle and Don talked about some of the resources and information that was available. So I would encourage anybody who's got a business that's struggling to go there and review the material. So the second thing was I was at a Wheels project and services meeting this afternoon, not at it, but virtually. And a couple of things that as a result of the COVID situation, the ridership has decreased 90%. And you got a plot by day and you can see it fall off, but it's quite phenomenal. The one good piece of news is that Wheels has been very careful in its financials, and it's in a reasonably good financial position to weather this. And there will be those assistance coming through, but as Supervisor Haggerty pointed out, the various organizations are going to have to show that they've used their money wisely, and Wheels can do that. I asked a question at the end of the meeting of the director, what's the morale at Wheels? And he said it was pretty good. But then someone noted that there are more calls to the police for assistance with issues on the buses, and a lot more calls Because it used to be maybe one call once every month or two. And now it's gotten to one call per day practically. And then I asked, is there any difference in ridership? Even though the ridership is down by 90%, we've got way more trouble calls. And they've said it's not the normal ridership on the bus at the moment. So even though ridership is down, trouble is up. And I think they're addressing that situation. So that's all I've got for now.
Okay, well, great. Thank you very much. And once again, as I mentioned earlier in the meeting, if you have not read Councilmember Munro's letter to the community, it's out on Nextdoor, it's out on the city webpage, but it really reflects how we on this council feel about the tremendous effort that's being made by the city workers to keep this city going and to maintain the essential services that all our residents have come to expect. My report out is on April 3rd. I was part of a Zoom meeting with the County Homelessness Task Force regarding the upcoming ballot initiative with the city manager and members of the county staff. And one of the things that was very important about that was to ensure that in the future ballot measure that there is a return to source component to make sure that the Tri-Valley gets its share of resources. On the same day, I was part of the San Joaquin Regional Rail Commission, also by Zoom. The commission is going to be buying 17 new rail cars at a cost of $66 million. We also approved a contract with a consultant to ensure working Wi-Fi on the train. This is the ACE train, that the Altamont Corridor Express. On the 9th, I was part of a meeting with VA, the Veterans Administration Healthcare Director Thomas Fitzgerald III, with all the congressional offices for the representatives for this region. I was the only representative from the city, from any city on the call. Most were congressional reps. There is widespread support to keep the VA hospital in Livermore open. As you may recall, that's been scheduled to be closed, but we have wide support in the Congress from our local representatives to keep that open and keep it functioning as a resource for the veterans. On the 10th, the U.S. Conference of Mayors had a conference with Dr. Deborah Birx. She's the White House specialist on the coronavirus response, and heard from other cities how they're dealing with shelter-in-place orders and resource constraints. 13th, we had the Alameda County Transportation Commission Programs and Projects Committee. The 14th was a Zoom meeting that I presented the city's response to the Women Realtors Council of Alameda County. The 15th was the Alameda County Mayors Conference, where the mayors of the 14 cities of Alameda County talked about our responses to the shelters in place and the COVID-19 efforts. The 23rd was the Alameda County Transportation Commission meeting, also by Zoom. We approved a contract with an a human resources consultant to expand and reorganize the Alameda County Transportation Commission. The commission is going to be going from 37 to 45 full-time equivalents. We, as a commission, felt this is necessary because the commission right now has direct oversight over 22 capital projects valued at over $3.8 billion. And that we also have oversight over 104 sponsor agency projects worth another $2.9 billion. So we are overseeing $6.7 billion in projects. And in order to expedite those, we're going to be going to an FTE equivalent of 45 staff members. We also had a CARES Act update. On the 24th, as the Vice Mayor pointed out, I also hosted a virtual meeting and a virtual symposium, if you will, with representatives from Stanford Healthcare Valley Care, where they talked about standing up the COVID-19 test site, which the 3 cities of the Tri-Valley are standing up along with Stanford Healthcare Valley Care and the Alameda County Fairgrounds. It opened today, 9 o'clock. It's going to be open all 5 days this week and for the next few weeks. It's free COVID testing for the 3 Tri-Valley cities, Livermore, Pleasanton, and Dublin. There are certain criteria. If you have if you're expressing symptoms, if you've been exposed to someone that has COVID-19, if you're over 65 years of age, the testing is free. They will be accepting insurance, but there are no out-of-pocket costs. So if you meet those criteria, if you need to follow up again, that all the information is available on the city website on our COVID-19 webpage. As far as matters initiated, I have 2. I actually have 1 matters initiated. I've been asked to bring back to the council a request to fly the diversity flag for that's to commemorate the start of the month of June. So to bring that back to the council to fly the diversity flag starting on June 1st. Do we have any additional hands here?
Yes.
One hand, Councilmember Carling. So we got 3, Coomber. Okay, looks like we got a full run of the table here. So Mr. City Manager, if you bring that back to the council for future discussion.
Yes, sir. We'll place it on your next agenda.
Okay, very good. And thank you. Finally, Laura Thornier, a longtime friend of the city and servant of the city, teacher at Granada High School. Laura Thornier passed away. We have all seen her artwork around town. She's the one that did the cowboy boots at Blacksmith Square for the utility box. She was also responsible for many of our bus shelters were painted by her students. And those are the LAVTA bus shelters around the community, which certainly brightened up our community. She was also a member of the Arts Commission for many years and has served this community very well. A lot of the artwork that we see around here are from her efforts. So she will be greatly missed. And with that, I'm going to adjourn this meeting in honor and memory of Laura Thornier. So thank you very much. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. That's a wrap.